All board members able to take themselves off of mute at this time.
John
For the
Mansfield.
pledge.
Yeah, John Mansfield, if you can take all the board members off of mute.
Yep. I think I have all of you. If not, raise your hand and I'll.
You need Margaret. You need Ken.
I think I asked everyone. They have to unmute themselves after I ask them.
I just got the ask, so good. We're good.
Yeah.
Margaret
You're all
and
set. Rachel, you're all set as well.
Okay.
We confirm the YouTube stream is in gallery view.
Yes, I believe it is. And then Kathleen, I just unmuted you as well. Nope, you're still muted. Let me try again.
I muted myself.
There you go.
Hey, John, if we mute ourselves, do you have to unmute us? Because that's what happened before. You unmuted me and then I muted myself just so you didn't hear the background. And then you had to.
That
unmute.
is correct. That's
Yeah.
just going to be for the first part of the meeting. Once we go into the normal session, I'm gonna take the mute off, and then you'll be able
Okay.
to talk.
All right. I just didn't want you to hear the background noise here.
It's not much worse than my toddler playing Mario, so it's fine.
It's true.
Okay, it is 7 o'clock. Are we ready to go? I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Board of Ed public hearing. We're going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody can stay off mute and repeat the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, for public hearing this time, we're doing a slightly different format than a couple of weeks ago. We had some issues with people signing up and not being able to present their comment. Thankfully, most of those signups were people just signing up to view only and not, and they weren't people that missed out on an opportunity to speak. But this time we're going with a different format. Everybody who is planning to speak should be in this Zoom meeting now. We'll go through the public comments one at a time, in which case we'll take a brief recess and then reconvene in our special meeting, at which point any of the members of the public that are on this call would need to go off of this Zoom invite and join the live stream on YouTube through the link on the board website. So I'll go through the list of signed up members of the public that would like to speak. First on the list is Colleen Minchik. Is Colleen in the meeting this evening? Not seeing her name, I will move on to Jenna Misselli. Is Jenna in the meeting? John, if you see Jenna, we can let her in.
I don't see Jenna.
Next name up is Mira Velia, 12 Mimosa Place. Is Mira in the meeting?
I did see Mira a few minutes ago.
Okay.
She's gone now, but she was here.
Yeah, I don't see her.
Okay, hopefully she'll come back in. Next up is Sarah Hanley, 19 Clearview Drive. Sarah, I'll unmute you now. You have to unmute yourself as well.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak. I was hoping to hear the new proposal about the art program, and I want to thank the board and Dr. De Silva for revisiting this and addressing parents' concerns about the art program. As you know, we had 477 signatures last May on a petition to against the cuts at the time, and we now have 283 signatures on a petition in which we hope to see a renewed commitment to a quality arts education for our youngest students in elementary and middle school. And I know I've been watching, and I know that you intend to provide something today, and I'm looking forward to that. We would like to see enough teachers to provide the same amount of instructional hours that were in the past, as well as the Art Leap and Rise Art program to those the students who would like to participate in that, and allow for enough support to go on field trips to our wonderful arts organizations here in town, and also to support the year-end art school shows, which are such a wonderful community builder for our community. So I hope that we'll see all of that in your proposal, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up on the list for tonight, we have Colleen Broderick, 18 Mimosa Court.
Hi, sorry, of course, we're getting a washer delivered right now too. So sorry about all the chaos here. Despite the tremendous challenges, I've been so impressed this year with the fact that our district has been able to consistently have our kids in school. And I know that the teachers and the administration are working their tails off, trying to keep everybody healthy and all the brains engaged. The response has modeled resilience and grit for both students and the community. But this budget doesn't meet the moment. With students' needs at a critical mass, a return to the status quo is simply inadequate. The district has shown an amazing ability to pivot this year, students and families too. But next year, don't go backwards. It's the wrong direction. I don't know what school or the world is going to look like in September, but there are 4 things that we do know. First one, we need healthy start times for all levels. Adequate sleep supports mental and physical health. Health has been the focus for this entire year. Don't abandon these guidelines now, the health guidelines now. The fact is that adequate sleep supports learning, and inadequate sleep is linked to depression and suicide ideation, among other things. Our district has created clear roadmaps to achieving this, and now is the time. The block schedule at the high school seems to be working well. Keep it and free up the time in the afternoon for work and sports. For the elementary students, create equity in start and end times. For the middle schools, recognize the same health guidance as for high school students, and make health a priority going forward, not just during this pandemic. 2, we need to bring back robust visual arts. To preach about the mental health needs and then remove students' outlet to explore and work through their feelings and experiences of the last year is not good. Hundreds of parents agree, as you've seen on these petitions. 3, we need smaller class sizes. Yes, many of them are low, I know, but for those that aren't, let's allow the students, the ability to connect with their adults and actually meet the students where they are to better support them emotionally and academically. And finally, kids need more playtime together once they're back, more advisory, more social workers and mental health experts.
30 seconds.
Please don't just talk about anxiety and the emotional toll that this year has taken on the kids and the staff. The budget has dollars allocated to non-evidence-based programming that doesn't support our students. And please take a look at the transportation budget. reallocate those wasted dollars to the actual needs going forward. To the board, I say, the taxpayers who elected you deserve to have every penny of the $100 million spent on helping children, nothing else. Board members, please ask the superintendent to take a second look at this budget with the clarity we've all gained this year. The budget should reflect our community's values and our students' immediate needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I'm sorry.
Moving on, next up is Keith Olson, 7 North Shore Drive. Is Keith Olson on? I see a Keith, but with a different name now. Circle back. Next up is Anna Lorenzo, 23 Doubleday Lane. Is Anna on? Yes. Anna, you're welcome to speak at this point.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Anna Lorenzo, and I'm a sophomore at Pratt Institute College in Brooklyn. It's an art school, and I would honestly say that the arts program, specifically in the elementary school and Art Leap, was probably the most impactful part of my just Richfield education. Without it, I would not have known or found my passion and what I love. And I think it's incredibly important for kids to have access to it, whether or not they're going to go into the arts themselves or if they just simply use it as an outlet for themselves. I think it's incredibly important. All I have to say.
Thank you very much. Next up on the list is Tracy O'Connor, 59 Prospect Street. I saw Tracy. Tracy, you're welcome to speak for 3 minutes.
Good evening to you all. I have 2 questions for the superintendent and the board, if I may. Why would you all choose to add yet another administration position at the elementary level over adding additional mental health support to help the most vulnerable of our students, the elementary schoolers? And they have suffered the most ramifications of COVID. Also, why aren't you decreasing any administration positions? That's my thing. At the middle and high school levels, when their numbers have declined and continue to decline over the past 10 years. How can any of you justify the huge number of administration at the high school? It's always been way over the top. They've been added to the positions, not decreased over the years. Putting administration positions above our students' best interests is abhorrent to me. And I only hope that more taxpayers, parents speak out for their children's mental health. I agree, arts is incredibly important, but I believe that mental health should be above that. And if you all decided to decrease an admin, you could probably keep both. So I thank you all, and I look forward to your honest responses. And great seeing you, my ex-members. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay.
Next up, we have Jen Zier, 34 Old Sib Road.
You may be under a different name.
Yeah.
I saw it.
I found you. You're welcome to speak now for 3 minutes.
Okay. So I'm a parent of a 4th grader at Barlow and a 6th grader at Scotch Ridge Middle School. And I'm also the art teacher at Branchville and Veterans Park Elementary Schools. And I'm here to advocate for the Richfield art program for my children and my students. Our youngest citizens deserve an equal opportunity to pursue their passion and their interests. And it's not only true for our elementary age students where this passion and exploration begins, but it's also a journey that needs to be nurtured through a child's K-12 educational experience. So art provides therapy and a source of self-esteem for our children. It provides a means to distress, an avenue for emotional balance, and a place for self-expression. And these skills cannot be measured, but must be celebrated, encouraged, and built upon. Art nourishes cognitive development, transferring to the development of other skills. It evokes emotions, creates awareness, and inspires others. Art creates a stronger avenue for collaboration, lifelong learning, and skills including physical development, developing fine and gross motor skills, critical thinking and problem-solving skills, creativity, and hand and eye coordination. It affects a child's overall learning and social emotional growth. This social emotional well-being and growth should continue to be a top priority. I support a budget that enhances a child's educational experience. Artists and creativity are vital to our schools and our society. Remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That word sometimes cannot express. Our Ridgefield mission and vision of the graduate cannot happen unless there is a collaborative school and community partnership with equal opportunities and a variety of experiences for all students. Therefore, I would like to see an equal art opportunity for the Ridgefield Public School students. Thank you for your time and commitment to our students and the Ridgefield community.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Kirk Carr of 62 Prospect Ridge. Mr. Carr, you're welcome to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, would you enable my share screen, please? Would you enable my share screen, please? Can you hear me?
Mr. Carr, just hang on 1 second. The chairman's screen actually went dark, so just give it a second.
What?
We're trying to get a share screen.
Hang on 1 second.
How come that's on a
Timeline?
yeah?
Because this is on YouTube. I'll turn this off. Unless you want to get out of that one and go into the regular.
I don't care. What'd you think?
Then we can hear you.
Did you see?
We certainly can.
Mr. Carr, just hang on a little bit. Mr. Steckler is trying to get back on. It looks like he lost his Wi-Fi. In education, we call this wait time, but this is like extensive, extensive wait time. Just hang in there.
He's coming back in now.
Okay.
Whether it's Lexia, where you can read along with it, or an actual book that you can read along.
Hello, I seem to have lost internet at home. I'm dialing back in. I don't know if I missed anything. Last I knew I was inviting Mr. Kirk Carr to speak for 3 minutes. Is that still where we are?
Yes.
Okay. John Mansfield, if you can allow Mr. Carr to speak, I will put my timer on for 3 minutes.
Excuse me, Jonathan. Mr.
Yeah.
Carr had asked if he could share his screen, and that's when everything went.
Yes,
There
I'm
is-
here, but I need the share screen to be.
I'm sorry, Mr. Carr. As I said in my email earlier today, there is no presentations. This is just.
Can I
public
have
comment.
my share screen?
No, that's a presentation. We are taking public comment. You have 3 minutes to speak. Would you like to do that now?
I'm sorry, I must have missed that. Well, look, everybody. Okay. Yes, the members of the Board of Education all received my video in their emails. About 50 people have viewed it so far. It's available on youtube.com as well as on Ridgefield. It's also available on ridgefieldrecord.com. Sorry, I'm getting a delay. So anyway, you've received my video and the presentation. I'm sorry that you decided to suppress it this evening, but I hope you'll all take a look at it, and I'd be happy to receive any questions from you or have an opportunity to participate with you in person or online at some time when you are interested in perhaps expanding your imagination a little bit. Anyway, I hope you'll consider what I said constructive, and I hope it will be useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up on the list is Aaron Clooney, 157 St. John's Road. John, can you enable Aaron?
Hello again. How are you? I spoke last week, and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So basically here again to support the arts, and just remind you that, without the sciences, we don't have the arts, and that all the arts are, a pillar to the foundation of our education, especially when it, is incorporated into the vision that apparently RPS wants to have for their graduating students. I was really happy to see Mrs. Iyer come on today. I can only echo pretty much everything that she said. And she said it way more accurately than I can, but in terms of resources, in terms of kids learning how to be imaginative, how to voice things that they maybe can't voice, especially in these times, I think is huge. That they can learn how to solve problems, all of that. So in terms of the budget, again, we cut way back last year. We understand why. We're trying to remedy some of this year. I just don't, if for some reason we don't get to a place where we can fix what's going on with the art program in all of RPS, I just want to make sure that we're not going to keep that as the norm. So going forward, we need to remember that things have been shaved back. I just don't see how you get to all these other goals that you want for student learning and curriculum and, having these amazing students without the arts. I feel like in the, what do you call it? The requirements for high school, some of those arts have already been rearranged in a way that kids can kind of, do less than what they would have done maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So this is really important. I think it's really important in this time. The lady that came on before me, or a couple of people before me, spoke about mental health, and I am all for that. I think that we really, even more so, need to keep our eye on, the kids with their mental health and what they're going through, and figuring out different ways to check in with them, perhaps surveys, blind surveys. I don't know what that is, but we need to be checking in with our kids. So there's been numerous articles, New York Times and quite a few other places that are really pushing this. And what I would say is that I don't want mental health over art. I would like to see them together. I think that is something that could definitely alleviate some of the mental, issues, with kids and students, so forth. So again, I'm just here. I've been here almost 15 years. I've got 3 kids in 3 different levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. And I just, I have seen this kind of shaving of art before, and never really coming back to what it really could be. And having one teacher for 2 schools and art just doesn't work. That's not what these kids need. It's not what to get you to that vision of your student. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks again.
Now I'm going to circle back. We did have a few names at the beginning that we did not find in the Zoom meeting at that time. John, can you see if Colleen Minshik is in the meeting?
She is not.
Jenna Misselli, 22 Twixt Hills Road.
I do not see a Jenna.
Mira Velia, 12 Mimosa Place.
I see a Keith Valia.
Let's assume that is Mira.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, great. Good evening. I'm the parent of 2 RPS students, one in elementary, one in middle school, and I'm also expressing my concerns about the impact of the cuts that were made to the elementary art program last year for all the different reasons that we've heard from others on this call. I've also talked with other parents who, along with me, strongly believe that art is really a critical balance to the academic rigorous curriculum that we have and this daily schedule that our children experience. And I just don't feel like our youngest students are getting the experience that they should with this reduced program. And looking at the schools in other countries like Finland, which is touted as one of the best in the world, art is a highly valued part of their curriculum from the very beginning. And it's prioritized as a key area of learning for all children, and especially for those whose learning style greatly benefits from artistic expression and exploration. So along with other parents you've heard from today, I ask that you please reinstate the art program back to what it was in the prior year and before that. It really was a wonderful curriculum and experience for all of our students, including my own sons who've really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. The other name that we missed was Keith Olson, 7 North Shore Drive. Do we see Keith Olson in the meeting?
I do not.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to, that closes the public hearing portion of this evening. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess. Then we will reconvene into our special meeting of the Board of Education at that time. I'm going to try to fix my router.
That sounds good.
Okay, it's 7:35. I believe we can now reconvene in our special meeting. So I'm calling that to order, and we'll start out with reports. I'll go first. I've just got a few items. The working group we discussed at our last Board of Education meeting around the going to Hartford with our reimbursed. The working group, Tina, Liz, and myself met with our representative, Amy Berger-Gavallo, and we expressed our concerns. We discussed that she felt it would be best to come in spoken word, not in a letter to the governor. We put together the documentation with the help of Dawn and Susie that went over to Representative Gervallo, and she has a call tomorrow at noon with representation from the State Department of Education. After that, we'll hear what the next steps are, but there was a good outcome from that working group. There was a legislative breakfast last Monday. I was unable to attend with the weather. I believe, Liz, you were able to attend. So
Yeah.
you have that in your legislative. Upcoming, there is a CABE webinar tomorrow on school board leadership through effective policy that I'll be attending. And the day after that, the National School Board Association's annual Equity Symposium is on the DIRE initiative, Dismantling Institutional Racism in Education. And that's on Wednesday. For most of the afternoon, I'll be attending that. That's all for me. Next up is Superintendent's report.
All right, so I'd like to start off by welcoming Miss Corey Gillette, our new Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. Her first day on the job, her first board meeting, hit the ground running, visited some schools, spent some time at Cabinet, meeting some folks here, met with math teachers at the middle schools, both ERMS and CERMS, and had some meetings already. So big welcome to Corey. We're glad she's here. Let's see. Today was the 100th day of school, if you can believe that. So hip, hip, hooray, it's the 100th day. And across our schools, they celebrated. But for sure, we saw it nice and clearly celebrated at Branchville, where the littles dressed up like senior citizens. And they were about 100 years old, and they were walking all around Branchville. So it was a great day to celebrate. And it feels bizarre to think that we've made it through 100 days in the situation that we've been in. But a big congratulations to our teachers, our families, and our administrators for working so hard to keep us in school. Scotland kicked off World Read Aloud Day, and their read alouds focused on books as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, exploring the stories of culture and identity. We have an ERMS teacher, Miss Tyra, who is holding after school sessions on a study of Black history in the United States. Our CERMS world language teachers have been bringing all of their concepts together with written stories. And soon we'll be celebrating Carnaval. We have some snow expected tomorrow and perhaps Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. So families should pay attention to see whether or not a communication comes tonight or in the morning. And other than that, we do have a long weekend coming up Friday, Monday, and Tuesday in celebration of President's Weekend. So we hope everyone's safe and sound. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Committee reports. I don't believe there were any committee meetings over the last period. But liaisons, any liaison reports?
Hey, Jonathan, can I just say, since the policy committee meeting was canceled last Monday because of the snow, the traditional snow day, so that's been rescheduled for anybody on, I think, for Monday, the 22nd, before our Board of Ed meeting. It'll now be at 6 o'clock.
That's at 6 o'clock, yeah. Any liaison updates? Kathleen?
There was a PTA meeting, and actually Dr. De Silva attended as well, and most of the questions on the 5th of February, and most of the questions, of course, were directed towards Dr. De Silva, and she talked, but also some of the members talked about some of the opportunities and things that were going on at their schools. And there were some questions about science and integrated studies. Of course, some people were talking about, arts versus PE and all of that. And Dr. De Silva talked about how this is going to be the focus of tonight's meeting. And and then some other questions. But then finally, there were questions about what you just spoke about, Jonathan, how you and Liz and Representative Berger, after Dr. De Silva left, how is that going to be played out? And I said that you were going to be meeting with with Representative Berger Gervalo and talking to the state, as well as there were some questions about what Senator Haskell spoke about in terms of school choice. And I said, I knew as much as they did at this point of what you could read and what he had said. I said, no decisions had been made, that it was something that questions were laid out, and it's a process, and it wasn't something any decisions had been made about. So it was, it was a well-attended meeting. Anything else to add, Dr. De Silva?
No, you covered it all, Kathleen. I was actually just going to mention that Ms. Flogel did join me on the Business and Jobs Subcommittee of Ridgefield's long-term recovery, and a lot of the same conversations that have happened in all these other sessions happened there as well with legislators. Will Haskell, I believe, joined us at one of our meetings, along with Amy Berger-Gavallo as well. And again, much of the same discussions that we had at our Board of Education last week, and at some of the legislative breakfasts, either sponsored by CABE or others. So.
Thank you. Other liaison reports?
Yeah, Jonathan, this is Liz, just from a legislative, since my muting situation was problematic, apologies. Yeah, the CABE breakfast meeting, again, to just reiterate, we talked a lot about the funding models again, and the continued changes of the calculations had just come out. Our legislators were not at the CABE breakfast that morning. We obviously have a separate conversation going with Senator Berger-Gavallo, but they weren't at that CABE breakfast on Monday morning. Mr. Haskell was at the other session that we did at the Economic Subcommittee as well, and I think both of them. But it was a good session about Ridgefield in particular and working together. And we just keep trying to reiterate the messaging around those calculations and ensuring that we've got, the more people that know that this is a bit of a black box, the better, and can help support our Board of Ed. So the basic encouragement is just continue to reach out to your legislators, as well, as they don't know as much as Governor Lamont's office does either. So I would encourage people to reach out directly to the governor's office as well.
Thank you. Any other liaison reports, or we will move on to our RHS student representative? Okay, you're up.
All right. Hi, everyone. So here at RHS, we are working on a Ben's Bells project, which is focused on kindness in the school climate and community. So we're working on planning fundraisers and raising money so we can afford the mosaic in our school courtyard. For our No Place for Hate initiative, this Wednesday is the start of our documentary discussion series focused on the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. And currently we're in the middle of a school-wide chess tournament called the Tiger's Gambit. So we're nearing the quarterfinals. Many students and faculty are involved and really enjoying it. Individual class councils are focusing on organizing grade-wide online game nights, trivia nights, just something to add some fun in the year. Athletes are very excited because winter sports are underway and competition began this week too. And the Performing Arts Department at the school just put on their winter production of the play Nothing Good Happens After Midnight, and there will be more viewing on YouTube on February 19th and the 20th. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Next up, NEAR representative, Stephen.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to start off by giving a very, very big heartfelt thank you to the PTAs across the district. With the sort of choppy schedules we had a lot of PTA functions that were sponsored for the teachers that got delayed. But my understanding, I think everybody, had their luncheons or whatever. But I just want to give a real big thank you to everyone at the PTA, simply because, it was a huge morale boost for us all. It was good to, have that sense of connection again back with the community. Also, again, thank you to the parents. I can't stress this enough. We cannot do it in the classroom without you. And I mean that sincerely. We're at a point where I think most teachers are almost communicating almost daily with certain parents. Parents have really been jumping in to help, particularly with remote students, and really help us to work as a team to educate, the kids. We have seen an increase, particularly in the secondary level, students starting to sort of trickle back in to the classroom, at a slow pace, but at a pace. We know the elementary schools went back to full in. The only thing that we do really ask is that the cohorts, that there's careful attention to the amount of students in the classrooms and the spacing. We're doing everything we can to encourage students to use face shields during lunch, to use wear masks, keep their distancing. But, sometimes that becomes, a little more than I think that can be reasonably expected sometimes when you're dealing with the number of students we're dealing with. So, all I ask is that, the numbers be watched carefully, that the cohorts remain carefully constructed, that they're split evenly, so we don't have one day with more students than another. Aside from that, thank you and have a good weekend, long weekend for most of you, I hope.
Thanks very much. PTA representative.
So just two small things to update everybody on. VP sponsored a read aloud event with author Susan Hood. They provided 26 power cord strips to the classrooms so that kids could keep their Chromebooks charged during the school day. They ordered utility carts and games and to help transport their indoor recess activities. And they began working on an invention convention. And then Branchville last week hosted a virtual event about how to talk to kids about differences with a specific focus on race and implicit bias. Their panelists were Nero Feliciano, Dr. Melanie Pearl, and author Amy Julia Becker. They presented and they answered questions that any of the parents had, and it was a huge success, and they are really looking to bring it to a wider audience through RPC. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, moving along. Approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the December 14th, 2020 regular board meeting.
Have a second? Okay. Comments, adjustments?
Sorry, I just found one minor typo. On page 2, in the first paragraph, sort of halfway down, in the sentence that begins "at this time, the governor does not know the amount of federal funding coming to the state that can then be," and it should be "distributed."
Okay.
That was it.
Any other adjustments? Okay, all in favor of approval of these minutes as amended? If that's unanimous. Approval of January 6th minutes. I have a motion.
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting for a grievance hearing on January 6, 2021.
Second. Kathleen? Any adjustments? No? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. And the special meeting from that same date, do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting to conduct the Assistant Superintendent interview on January 6, 2021.
Do I have a second? Sean? Don't see much to amend on here. Anybody see anything? Margaret?
Sorry. Actually, this is from the original packet. In the second packet, I didn't see minutes, but in the first packet, the minutes, I think, don't include the vote for reconvening in public session. It says the meeting reconvened in public session. Am I looking at the right one? This is about the assistant superintendent?
Convene in public session, appointment of assistant
Right,
superintendent.
Yep. Ms. Ruggieri moved that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to offer a contract of employment, but there's no vote there.
Good catch.
I don't know what the vote was. I'm assuming. it was-
Okay, we can have, we can go back to the videotape on that. Everybody in approval of approving these minutes with the addition of the vote. Seven, opposed? Is this abstaining? Liz abstained, okay.
I wasn't there.
Right, thank you. Okay, moving along, we have discussion and possible action items. We're starting with the Edulog Transportation Report.
Okay, so I'll just briefly introduce Pete Salinas, Andy Levenguth, and Spencer Jaco from Edulog. They're here to present a review of the assessment reports for the Ridgefield Public Schools that were asked of them back in March or February. And obviously many things happened since that time, but there were a number of questions that came up at an earlier budget meeting, and I felt like it was worthwhile having them come here and having the board ask the representatives their questions directly. And hopefully we can have a broader picture of what's happening with efficiency in our transportation provider. And we have Rick Lupinacci here as well, who can speak to the on-the-ground bus situation that he navigates daily. And so I believe that Spencer and or Andy will be sharing their screen, and everyone should have the presentation available to them. Perfect.
Can you all hear me? This is Andy.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, thank you all for having us here today. My name is Andy Levenguth, a senior consultant with Edulog. Our division is more on the consulting side, looking at efficiency, optimization, anything that we can do to improve system operations, reduce costs in transportation, put money back in the classroom, boundary studies, a lot of different things. But we also have another component, which is our software, which Ridgefield Public Schools does use, the Edulog software for routing and scheduling. When we first were engaged by Ridgefield Public Schools back in about March or February, the discussion was on optimization, wanting to optimize the system. But typically a prerequisite for doing an optimization is doing an analysis of the data contained within the transportation system to evaluate feasibility of what a optimization could come up with, how the data is modeled, and how efficient it is actually running. So what we're doing tonight is kind of walking through a quick presentation to complement the written reports that we did provide on both a data assessment and an efficiency assessment. So what Spencer is going to do, our optimization consultant that did most of this work, is walk you through that presentation. And then at the end, we've got an opportunity for some questions if anybody has any questions. And so with that, I will let Spencer take it away.
Thank you, Andy. And good evening to everyone else. Hopefully you're all doing well tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm assuming everybody can see the screen just fine. If that is the case, then we will move forward. So as Andy said, we were hired out to do a series of reports that assess various aspects of Ridgefield's data. 2 out of the 3 were produced. But as of February 2021, we haven't really been able to come out with the last one because it requires an on-site visitation, which has been postponed due to COVID-19 and the travel restrictions that we are currently facing. But we did come out with these 2 other reports. The first one was an initial data assessment report that looked at the quality of the data being maintained at Ridgefield Public Schools. The second one went beyond the data after we had validated that and looked at the efficiency aspects of the transportation data. How is it operating? What challenges do they face? What opportunities and roadblocks are there present at the district? And then the third one, of course, has been postponed as for the future. So we will not discuss that one during this meeting. However, before we get too far into this meeting, it would be good to define a few terms that are commonly used in transportation and are used by Edgelog whenever we are disseminating results to the public. Now, when it comes to school transportation, there are three kind of levels that deal with the typical school bus. When we are looking at efficiency and data as well, we tend to start with the stop level data, which is basically the physical location where students are picked up and dropped off. Pretty straightforward. When these stops are put onto a bus run, we simply call it a run, which is simply a sequence of stops that a bus makes when transporting students to and from school. Now, there's various parts to the run, but the run is completed when all students are delivered to the school in the morning or to their respective bus stops in the afternoon. When we put all of the runs together on a bus, it is called a route. And a route basically defines the activity and path that a bus makes throughout a typical day. There can be multiple routes in a system, and a route typically represents one vehicle each. Now, just beyond transportation, we also have to consider one of the most important aspects of a transportation model, and that is the bell time, which the bell time, of course, signals the time of starting the school day and ending it as well. So in a school sense, there are two bell times to consider, the early morning start bell and the afternoon release bell. Now, of course, because there is more than one school in a district, we will often see that districts organize their school bells into groups called tiers. Now, tiers can take any number of forms, and in the case of Ridgefield Public Schools, they have organized their schools into 4 different groups. To illustrate a little bit of this, we have a short graphic down here to kind of show 2 different tiers on a timeline in the morning from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The middle and high schools start first at 7:45 a.m., with the elementary schools starting at 8:45 a.m. These turquoise colored bars here represent the bus run being made, picking up students in the morning, transporting them to school, and then dropping them off before the school bell time. Now, because these 2 runs are on the same timeline together, this can generally be considered the activity for one bus. And there's going to be multiple buses stacked upon each other throughout the day. But this is how generally it's a good way to visualize and organize your transportation data. When we're talking about the travel that a bus makes during a given day, there are 2 important types to disseminate here: loaded travel and deadhead travel. Now, loaded travel can be considered the time and distance required for a bus to complete a single run. But when we talk about loaded travel specifically, it is when the bus picks up a student from the first stop and its first student on its run to when it drops off all students at the end of the run. Now, this will reverse in the afternoon when a bus will pick up all the students in the morning and then have loaded travel until it drops off the last student at the last stop of its run. But bus travel is, of course, more than just the loaded part of it. We also have to consider deadhead travel. And that is the time and distance required for a bus to get to the second run upon completion of the first. It can be thought of as the required amount of time and distance between 2 runs in order for the connection to be feasible, i.e. if there is enough time for a bus to complete it. Now, these 2 are, of course, interdependent upon each other and depend upon how a bus operates during the day, where it goes, how many students it needs to pick up, and how far it has to travel. But the quality of the data is also important as well. And one of the things that you will see sometimes in a system is a thing called negative slack. We define negative slack as infeasibility. And this is a key word here because negative slack occurs when there is not enough time between 2 runs to make the connection. Now, the negative values in this sense could be seen as the amount of additional time required between 2 runs in order to make it feasible. Now, to help kind of illustrate this, in the previous slide, we showed that deadhead travel is a portion that sits on the top of the run. There's no deadhead travel for the first time in the run because, well, there's no other runs for a bus to make. However, in the case of negative slack, the amount of deadhead travel required to connect between the middle and high school run to the elementary school run is too great. And in this case, the negative slack impedes upon the middle and high school run time. So it's basically telling us how many minutes we are short in the data. Now, negative slack can come from two sources. One, it can be a problem within the data itself, whereas the bus might be on time. It may be operating within the policies defined by the school district, but the data does not reflect it accurately. However, the second way that negative slack can show up is when the buses are truly late. And in a system where there is not enough time already for buses to make it, then negative slack will be a natural consequence of everything. So these are the terms that we felt were important to define beforehand because it helps kind of set the tone and get everybody on the same page before we move forward. Now, when it comes to the two reports we did, the first one that we had taken on was an assessment of the district's transportation data. This is the bedrock of a transportation data system, and it needs to be accurate in order for good results to be disseminated from it. We typically will do these before going on to the efficiency assessment because issues, errors, missing entries, and other stuff can hinder our ability to determine whether a system is efficient or not. And it is also important to lay that groundwork down before we begin any further discussions on what should be done next. Once the data assessment was completed, we then moved on to the efficiency level assessment because now that we knew what the data looked like, we could then have a better sense of how to interpret it when it comes to efficiency. Now, when it came to assessing efficiency, the whole point was to identify the key constraints that will face a district in the case of RPS, Ridgefield Public Schools, and also how these are being addressed. Now, when it came to assessing the efficiency of Ridgefield Public Schools, there's two main issues that we came to here. Now, these two biggest issues are something that aren't easily addressed. It is something that is actually quite unique to the district and presents a real transportation to student transportation that you might otherwise not see in other districts. The first one here in this slide I'm showing you is the topography. Now, this may be obvious to people who are living within Ridgefield Public Schools, but it does need to be noted because the district is located within the Berkshire Mountains and has actually created a high level of relief across the district. Hills, lakes, ravines, all that stuff. These features all constrain your transportation and they work against a bus fleet when providing service to students. Now, this type of layout tends to lengthen travel times because buses can't get up to speed as quickly before they have to reach a corner, for example. And it also reduces the number of students that can be effectively transported per run. So you're basically constraining a bus's ability to service a district simply by where you live. This is something that cannot be easily overcome, and it is something that the Transportation Department has worked to address. The second issue that the district faces comes down to the form of infrastructure, which leads into the discussion of home stops. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, the community of Ridgefield is at this point over 300 years old. Its networks of roads were laid down well before the automobile ever came about. And even with all of the improvements since then, it is still a highly complex web of streets and all of that stuff. It really creates less than optimal conditions for the modern bus to operate, specifically a large full-size 65-passenger bus. Now, to add to this, there's also widespread lack of infrastructure that would provide safe walking paths to centrally located stops. In a general sense, these are sidewalks and just the kind of infrastructure that allows students to safely walk to consolidated stops that aren't just at their home. Now, as a result of this, over 80% of students that are transported at Ridgefield Public Schools are picked up and dropped off at their home address, meaning that over 80% of students do not walk to a stop at all. A lot of this is because there have been safety issues cited at the district for students to walk safely to a stop. And as a result, most students receive a genuine level of service provided by the district this way. To illustrate this outcome, we have, first of all, this chart here that shows the student number of assignments per stop. And this can be thought of as the number of students assigned to a single stop location in the morning with this turquoise bar and in the afternoon with this black bar. Or excuse me, the bus stops and van stops. But what it still very much illustrates the point here is that there are very few students beyond the 4 to 6 range that are assigned to a single stop. The vast majority of students being transported are assigned to stops that have only 1 to 3 students assigned to it. So this basically just visualizes what we were saying on the previous slide. Now, these are the challenges that we thought are the biggest ones facing the district. And to combat these, Richmond Public Schools has built a very unique transportation model that is actually relatively efficient and has been very effective at meeting service level requirements across the district for the public. But the most important aspect of this system is the 4-tiered bell time system that the district currently operates. Shown in this table here, we have the bell times for the morning in this first column here, followed by a brief break during the midday where there's no real transportation occurring, and in the afternoon with the same thing here. To walk you through at least the morning bell times, the first group of schools, the high school, starts at roughly 7:25 to 7:30. Afterwards of which there's a 30 to 35 minute gap before the next group of schools, the middle school, begins at 8 o'clock. This same trend continues with 30 to 35 minutes before the first set of elementary schools start, and then finally with our largest gap of 35 to 40 for the last group of elementary schools. Because of Ridgefield's mirrored system, this whole system is replicated in the afternoon. So it's generally the same structure, it's just reversed in the afternoon when it comes to transporting students. Now, the 4-tiered model is actually not often seen across the United States and Canada. I've worked with numerous districts that have all sorts of different types of transportation systems, structures of bell times, and the 4-tiered model is something that is actually a very unique approach to transportation. In the sense of Ridgefield, it actually works very well, mainly because of the problems we stated before. I mean, you guys have a highly high amount of relief with your district that really constrains your bus's ability to make long runs and transport high amount of students. So the way Ridgefield addressed this is basically by splitting these school bell times into 4 groups. They have been able to have runs that travel shorter distances, take less time to complete, and are able to transport students to school on time with relatively short ride times. But there is a trade-off to this, an unavoidable trade-off. Each run and each bus, when it's making its transportation run, transports fewer students on average than most people would expect a bus to be able to do, especially when looking at the 65 passenger buses. But like I said, this is an unavoidable trade-off when you're operating 4 tiers of bell times, because it tightly constrains the ability for a bus to make a longer run, because it not only has to get the students to and from school, but it also has deadhead travel, which means that the travel required to finish one run and get to the second. So this compounds the issue with the district trying to provide timely service. And as a result, the one metric that has relatively fallen is not great. Now, when looking at the type of vehicles servicing the students at the district, it bears some importance to mention what the fleet is comprised of. Now, as of last March, RSS has been focused on the 30 yellow buses in their fleet, along with 22 reduced capacity vans. Now, this type of mixed fleet is widely used across the district, and they each have effective capacities shown in the table below. Each student group, elementary, middle, and high schoolers, have different rates that they can fill up a bus. You know, some buses can handle more students in an elementary sense, but as you get older and older, a bus typically will transport fewer students. When looking at the activity of buses throughout the day, we see that 30 buses plus 22 reduced capacity vans leads to a total amount of 52 routes. Now, all of these routes are used in the morning and afternoon period, with a smaller amount being used for midday transportation. A total of 373 bus runs are made throughout the day, with an even amount made between the morning and afternoon periods. As a result of having 52 routes, making a grand total of 373 runs throughout the day, there's a high level of utilization of your buses at the district. At 7.2 average runs per route, 3.6 per period, this is a very high level. This is high for urban districts, suburban districts, and rural districts. And it is something that is generally targeted by only the most urban school districts in the United States. When it comes to visualizing the activity of the buses throughout the day, we have this chart here that shows the bus activity levels as the day progresses. Now, each bar in this graph represents a 5-minute period. And each 5-minute period will basically tally up the number of buses that are accurate, which are split between runs being made by vans and runs being made by buses. In the morning, you can clearly see the 4 bell time tiered system operated by the district, with 4 notable peaks and valleys occurring as buses drop students off, begin their run to the next run, and then transport students for the next group of schools. In the afternoon, this same thing reverses, but we also see that there is a bit more of a high level of activity there, less peaks and more of just a high level of activity once it gets going. This is just very useful to show people, as it shows what buses are doing and generally when operations are constrained, with the highest level of constraint occurring in the afternoon period. Now, when it comes to identifying opportunities to improve the transportation, i.e. increasing the efficiency of its system, we did run into several roadblocks throughout our data and efficiency assessments. While we offer the services to provide optimization studies and planning out for transportation, these roadblocks must be addressed first before our assessments can be held of any value. Now, the first challenge that we came across when talking about the data is that negative slack is quite widespread across routes in the data. This impacts 50% of active vehicles in your transportation data. And to put this more simply, there's just not enough time in the system for all buses to make all of their assigned runs. This is due to a lack of accuracy on time, and it prohibits the ability of Edgelog to optimize its routes. The second part ties into the first and is honestly almost the most important part of this, is that the district does not currently track which students are and are not riding the bus within their current Edgelog data. And one evidence point we have of this is that multiple runs in the data currently are transporting more students than available bus seats. Now, we know this is not the true case, but this is recorded in the data. And this comes down to a policy of assigning students who are eligible to a stop to a run, regardless of whether they ride the bus or not. And this policy of assignments prohibits Edgelog's ability to optimize runs. So we have 2 levels here. Our ability to optimize runs, which is the path a bus makes as it's servicing stops, and the ability to optimize routes, which means putting runs together in the most efficient bus paths throughout the day. To illustrate this a little bit, the first chart compares the run assigned loads between both vehicle groups, bus runs and van runs. And you can notice here that the van runs, of course, do not have anybody really assigned above 30 students. These are generally more accurate as they are shorter runs and lower student loads that ride in general. However, when you look at the turquoise bars for the bus runs, you notice that the student load has a much more of a general right-handed tail, with some of the buses having over 80 students assigned to it. This is mainly just to visualize the fact that runs in the data are overloaded and don't necessarily accurately reflect what is going on with student assigned loads. Now, how is this addressed and how do we measure this? Well, when we're looking at the students assigned per run, we actually want to look more at the utilization rates. which in this case is students transported, the total number of them, divided by the total number of seats available. Multiply that by a percentage, and then you get our utilization rate. These next few tables in here compute this rate for, first of all, the type of schools that are serviced, elementary, middle, high school, and also the type of vehicle that makes the run, whether it is a bus or a van. Now, this chart that I've just explained, of course, takes a few minutes to actually get. But to walk you through this a bit, we are looking at runs for only half of the day for the morning AM period. The vehicles that we are looking for are split between two sections, vans and runs. And then finally, we look at a van making an elementary school run, a van making middle, high, and then again, the same for a bus. When moving on to the gray columns here, we first list the maximum number of students that can be transported on each of these respective groups of vehicles, where the vans are closer to 30-20, and the buses are using their 65-person capacity. The next column over talks about the number of average students that are assigned per run across the morning period. In the case of van runs, there is an average of between 8.3 and 9.7 students per run, which compared with the maximum number of students that can be transported gives us an average utilization rate of between 27 and 48%. This is the same thing that happens with the buses. With 65 maximum students to 60, the number of average students ranging between 33 and 53 students, and an average utilization rate of 51 to 89%. Finally, in the last column, we simply restate the total number of runs being made by buses or vans throughout the AM period. Now, the one part we have highlighted here is this one here. For buses that transport high school students or parochials under the AM period have an average utilization rate of 89.6%. Now, for most districts, that's going to be pretty good. 89% of your capacity is being utilized is actually a good target for most any district to have. However, in the case of Ridgefield, the policy of assigning all eligible students to stops and runs, regardless of whether they ride or not, causes these runs to have the highest levels of ridership in the district falsely. We looked at this and then upon closer inspection realized that these were not accurate numbers of students. And so as of this moment, we don't exactly know the true level of ridership occurring at the high school level. Part of that is because multiple runs transport more students on a bus than there are available seats, but also it is mainly because of this policy that when it's being translated over to the data causes this kind of distortion in runs. Part of this comes down to, okay, how do we make the assigned loads more accurate? And let's say, even if we can get those more accurate, and to a point where they reflect the total number of actual students writing the data. Let's say we put that through optimization and manage to reduce the number of runs being made by vehicles throughout the day. Even if we can do this, it is not clear whether this will lead to a decrease in transportation costs or an increase in your transportation system. Because under the current 4-time bell time structure, vehicles are just severely restricted on how much time they are allowed to transport students. Again, we've talked about this before earlier in this presentation, but it bears repeating here. These buses can't make long runs, and as a result, they can't transport a high number of students. And as a result, when you add in deadhead travel to this, sometimes an additional 25% of travel time is spent just getting to the start of the run after it finishes its last one. To kind of illustrate that a little bit, we have average travel times and distances shown in this table below for the categories of loaded travel time, which is transporting students, and deadhead travel time, which is getting between runs. During the day, an average run time will take about 34 minutes, traveling 13.7 miles. But the average run time for a deadhead travel oftentimes comes out to 10 additional minutes, which comes down to about 44 minutes of travel time in your data. And that is significant in a system that barely has 30 to 40 minutes of available time between bell times. To illustrate this further, we show travel times on this, in this familiar chart for bus runs and van runs across the full day, with the peak for both of the vehicles occurring between 21 and 30 minutes before tapering off towards the edge. This exact same scenario plays out when we look at mileages, whether it's loaded mileage or deadhead mileage, with it peaking at small amounts of distance and slowly tapering off as you get higher and higher. So this is where the peak is, but there are still definitely runs that are forced to make longer distances during its day. So where do we go from this? Well, first of all, we should say that when taking into account all of the challenges facing Ridgefield Public Schools, we conclude that their transportation system is operating at a relatively efficient level. Factors such as the district's topography and infrastructure have made it very difficult for a bus fleet to operate at a higher level of efficiency than what you currently do. The district's approach to using a 4-tiered system combined with operating a fleet comprised of buses and vans have allowed it to meet service requirements without penalizing student experience and leading to longer ride times. And this system in some ways can be described and summarized as a system that achieves a complex yet delicate balance. Now, and this delicate balance means that trying to find and change anything to this transportation system could very well incur a high level of costs. And it certainly needs to be taken time to study and research to find improvements for. This isn't something where a simple fix or tinkering around the edges will easily solve your challenges that are facing you guys, because where you guys have built your transportation has led you guys to an efficient system, but one that is kind of constrained naturally in all the ways we have described here. However, there is a path forward. Two things that really want to be addressed before we really start moving into an assessment phase looking at improving your system. The first one is that the true level of ridership needs to be reflected in your database. Now, the current policy of assigning students to stops regardless of whether they ride or not is, good from a managerial standpoint and helps from day-to-day operations of routers, but it distorts the true behavior of runs, how many students they're transporting, how many miles and minutes they're going. This is all kind of distorted by this policy making it into the data. And as a result, we cannot optimize runs in good faith and have results that are worth anything until we actually know who is riding the bus and who isn't. Because we want to build runs around the true level of ridership, not just students who may or may not ride. Secondly, once that is addressed, negative slack must be addressed within the data set. This is the result of course, runs that have to be optimized on a route level. With infeasibility in the system, we have an inability to work on the routes from an optimizing standpoint. It works for a managerial standpoint, but moving forward, this is something that we would like to see addressed. And that essentially is the assessments that we have done so far. That covers the data assessment that we started off with, followed by the efficiency assessment, which we have finished up last spring. Are there any questions or comments at this time from the board?
Here they are. I will look for raised hands, and the first one I saw was Liz.
So thank you. Thank you for that presentation. So I have a list of questions. So I'll start with one, and then we can decide if we go around the horn, Jonathan, and see if others have similar ones. So there were a lot of conclusions stated throughout this assessment, yet the most profound one is that we are relatively efficient, even though all of the data that you looked at to create those analysis was poor or inaccurate. So I just want to sort of make a statement, but also ask a question. How could anyone say that we are relatively anything when there's no benchmark data and you don't have good data to begin with? That's really a poor way to both partner, but also come up with conclusions when the data's not good. So therefore the conclusions are, we use a term in the corporate world called garbage in, garbage out. And I'd love to hear your explanation of how you can come up with all these conclusions without any trending, without any relative data, without any baselines of similar districts, and our data is poor.
Well, so let me touch on that. You're right. Poor data in, poor data out. Garbage in, garbage out. It's the same thing that we talk about, which is why we want to start with an efficiency and a data assessment so that we understand what's going on, right? And when we refer to relatively efficient, what we're really looking at is that tiering model of how you can structure your routes. You're absolutely right that we don't have good data to base it on, but looking at a route structure where you are averaging over roughly 7.5 runs per route, from a KPI perspective, if you look at like the Council of Great City Schools, I think the mean on that is usually around 4.5 to 5 runs per route, right? So when you're stacking your runs together on a route perspective, you're doing a good job of getting a number of runs, those rapid fire kind of runs together on routes, which is an efficiency component, right? But we can't tell how efficient you are, absolutely not, because we don't know the true ridership and what is actually being done on the road. So when we talk about relative efficiency, right, we're talking about how the transportation department has built their transportation model based on their practices of assigning students and stacking those runs together on routes to have those buses service as many schools as possible within the bell structure they have. But it's just based on the baseline data that we have within your system. You know, every school district is a little bit different in how they operate their transportation models, but having 7.5 runs per route is efficient, right, from a routing perspective. But the underlying data, the student level to stop level to the negative slack, all of that is in question, and that's why we kind of have that balance of efficiency and bad data. You know, we're trying to say that.
Clarifying point on what you said, Pete, for the general public. We don't have the data. We're only relatively efficient against ourselves, not any kind of benchmark or other normalized, optimized data. I just want to clarify that. I'll stop there and let the others ask their questions.
I did see, I believe, Ken, did you have a hand raised? And then Sean next.
I'm good, Jonathan.
Yep.
Mine's a little bit easier to answer, I think. Again, yes, thank you very much for the detailed analysis. On when we're looking at the widespread use of home stops, can be visualized in the chart below. So if we go back to that, based on my reading of the chart, it looks like we're making 57 stops between buses and vans where 0 riders are getting on. So how is that? What is that?
So oftentimes, right, you know, and this is just what was contained within the data that was, you know, managed by the RPS's transportation department. A lot of times stops, as students move, they are left on runs, right? And for some reason, like maybe it's because they expect somebody to come back later, maybe it's just a miss, but there are stops often in transportation data that we see that no students are assigned. And these are other cleanup things that should happen, you know, from an optimization perspective. And we have an algorithm that can do this optimization. We wouldn't typically want to include a stop that has a 0 load. We'd want to go off of assigned load or a head count load in order to build those runs. But looking at the data, there are stops in there that just probably need to be cleaned out, but they might have a reason for being there that the transportation department might be able to answer. But sometimes you have stops 0 load, but they exist in the data. And it's more just a reporting out that there are those stops in the data.
Andy, can I just ask a clarifying question that is connected to Ken and Liz, and maybe Rick Lupinacci needs to describe this a little bit further. But the stops so the ridership on the road, that part of the data that you don't have, and the question that Ken just described is that currently RPS assigns every student to a stop. And so when we're looking at this chart here, that's what this is also describing, is that every student is assigned to a stop, whether or not they elect to get on that school bus or not. Is that accurate, Rick and Andy?
That's our understanding, yes. Rick can clarify.
Yes. So actually, Dr. De Silva, I understand that. That was actually going to be a second part of my question that I had, but this having zero ridership then actually speaks counter to that. Because if it did have somebody assigned to it, then that stop would have one or more people assigned to it, whether they got on the bus or not. That's the challenge. As far as I understand it, that's the challenge with the data is we don't know how many people are actually on the bus at each stop. So that's the challenge, and that got to the second part of my question. But here we're saying we have a stop with 0 people, which means it could actually have 1 or 2 people. But we're recording it in our data, RPS's data, as 0 riders at that stop.
Can I ask just a clarifying question on Ken's? Andy, you mentioned you don't know why some of the data exists, and maybe as Rick gets off mute, he can answer this. But was there an assessment process done on this data to answer those inquiries that you had, to explain it a little bit?
We met several times with Dawn and Rick to kind of get an understanding of why these things did exist in the data. Yes.
Rick, do you want to speak to the student assignments per stop?
Yes, I could do that. If it's an intersection stop, I usually do not delete it from the run because someone will eventually use that stop. It may not be next week, but it may be next month. And I would just have to go back and insert it back on the run. So I just keep the empty intersection stops on the run. I could delete them all if it seems better. And house stops, I try to delete them as they leave. I know there's still some that are there, but I try to go through some runs every day to get rid of those stops.
So I have a quick question. On the software program itself, it sounds like we're using it in a manner that works best for our administration to manage the daily work, but that same utilization of the system does not allow for the accurate data collection that would be needed for a good efficiency assessment. Is this system capable of doing both at the same time?
There could be models that could be designed in a way that would work, right? I always prefer, and from a best practices standpoint, what we want to be able to do is have the data truly represent what you plan to put on the road on a daily basis, right? That's the expectation. It's always plan and reality, right? And so what often happens, and typically it's in a smaller school districts, they work options, right? To try to figure out, well, we want to be able to do this, and we want to be able to tell a student that might ride at some point that they would be assigned to this bus, right? So they build their practices around that, where that totally deviates from being able to truly represent as what's happening on the road. So you can build models, like you have the ability through simulation, through basically having mirrored runs or copied runs, where you could have almost like a basic run, right? That truly is designed to represent what is on the road. And then a secondary run that is more representative of every student, right? You could build that. It's just a matter of modeling it within the system. There's not a restriction in the software that would prevent you from doing that, but you want to be able to build that in a way that it makes sense to you and how you can use it, right? The data contained within the tool that we offer, the Edgelog software, can be, it can be managed and maintained however you truly see fit, right? When you're looking at efficiency and what we're being asked to do, efficiency and optimization, we want accuracy. We want as much accuracy as we can as that foundation to be able to go out and use, a run optimization tool that we do have algorithms designed to, string together every run servicing those schools in the most efficient and optimal way, right? But when we do that, we want to know those true data points of who is utilizing those stops versus who is not, right? And you could do that by modeling the data with that secondary run that is more representative of every kid, but you have a primary run that is designed to be what the driver would actually drive on a daily basis. So you can do that. There's no restriction to be doing that.
So to clarify that a little bit, so basically there would be 2 runs for every run, like an optimal run and an actual run, or every student run versus how many people actually rode that day. And then the analysis could be done by grabbing all of the actual runs,
right?
And you could do analysis by all of the full runs. Say if every student were to ride the bus.
Well, I'm not sure I'm quite following you on that, but I mean,
Okay.
we could do this on every kid, right? You know, like as well as just the individual students. Yes, I mean,
Because I think that's part of the challenge is that sort of what one of our requirements, and I may not be explaining this properly, so anyone correct me, is that we need to plan as if every student on that route is going to ride a bus on any given day.
Well, Ken, the legislation says we have to have a seat for a bus on every day. The way
Right.
RPS has chosen to implement that is to leave every single house that ever had a student, it sounds like, clarify if I'm wrong, on a bus route just in case. And, you know, I've read the legislation, and I do think that there is some limitations to it, but we also don't know how much that's even costing us for reality. I mean, if we
Right.
really, which I don't believe any of the data in here because the vendor has said this data isn't good. So even if we say we have 43% or whatever it was of middle school students riding the bus, we should have a route that's optimized to that. And if someone calls, we make a change. Instead, we've chosen to say, we're not going to make any changes. We're just going to leave it as though every student is riding a bus every day instead of having the flexibility, which could save us who knows how much, because we don't really have the baseline data to prove that out. So I think we're solving for something that I don't think we can solve for on this call. But I do think the biggest gap is we have a software package we're paying for that the data is not good in. And so why are we paying for the software if we're not able to use its optimization capabilities? Maybe there's other reasons, but I think we should be clear about that.
Or why aren't we using those capabilities?
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think where we're getting to, and I think you're right, I don't think we're going to answer all the questions at this meeting. But I think where we're getting to is the software does have the capability to do both of those things, where it can track accuracy, and I'm just going to explain it this way, where the actual riders on a particular day on a particular route, while also analyzing the maximum riders on any particular route.
So Andy, jump in here, but yes, the software, or Rick or Dawn, the software does have the capability to do what you're both describing, right? And so we've asked this question. So can we even, let's just say at this point, ask families to opt in, right? Opt in whether or not they're going to be taking a school bus. And so therefore we would then create the routes based on that description. And now if students elect or parents elected to, or excuse me, yeah, they opted in or opted out, excuse me, they opted out. And now they decide they want to opt in, they need a bus. So within 48 hours, let's say, we reroute that bus, or we have that route already created. EduLog can do that for us. Cost-wise though, for us, it's not going to change because we have to have that plan B scenario. Am I making sense?
Well, the way that I understand it is if we have a fixed 50 buses, and we need to, which is why you have the software. So if we need to change the routing, stay within 48 hours, the software can come up with the optimal routes, giving certain parameters for those 50 buses. So if we change the parameters, that's the point of having the software. The software is going to do that rerouting for you. So if we have sort of our defined costs for 50 buses, I'm making this up.
Yep.
For my use, the costs aren't going to change but the routes might. So 7 routes might change, for example, to add one house to a route.
That's right.
But the software, that's why we pay for the software, because they're able to do that optimally much more easily than we could without it. So I think to me, it's tracking it. Is there a way to track whether they opt in or out because we need to have the seat on the bus? Can we track how many kids on that day, on Monday, how many kids got on this route, on this AM bus?
One of the things that when we originally back in last February, March, went out and had a discussion with Edulog to do an optimization and utilization study, one of the things or data assessment study, one of the things that one of the parts of that was to come in and look at how we were using the system and to give us support in how to better utilize the different options that the software package had. What happened was COVID, they didn't get a chance to come out. They took the data that we had at the time based on the past practice that we had and the routes and stuff that were created in the the number of buses and how we route those students that we have was as efficient as we could possibly get at the time. I know that since I've been here, we have been through 4 or 5 different changes on how to do the busing and how to do the routing and how to do, how many buses and how we're going to get students from one place to the other. And then there's a change and then there's, 20 other kids that jump on and then it's on this side of town or the other side of town. Or we have special education students in the mix that we have to worry about. And with the high school students and the special education students, they're not in any certain area. They're all over the district, which creates another problem. And then we have numerous, I'd probably say probably more than 80% of our parents want a stop at their driveway. So then we are rearranged and we had to work with those scenarios. So we've been through a lot of different studies. We've been through a lot of different changes and different ways of trying to do the busing. Is it all perfect? No. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. One of the things that we need to do is to be able to get the software, to get Edulog in, to work with Rick to make sure that we are using the software the best that we can be using that software on. Is there a way to change and do it all on ridership? Possibly. I know there's one district out there that probably does it that way. Most districts don't, and there's probably good reasons why they don't. What is the exact answer, or what is that happy medium between? What is the nice balance that we need to have? I'm not exactly sure, but it is definitely something that we're looking at, is something that we're working towards. And hopefully once we can get travel and get Andy or Pete or somebody out to help look at our data, sit down with us and work the system to the best that we can, I think we're kind of where we are.
So John, sorry, Ken, can I ask you a couple of questions on that? So first, learning to use software is done every day via Zoom. So I think that there's plenty of opportunities regardless of if we can keep people out. I have a couple of questions on that though. I don't know how long our contract has been with Edulog or if they have year-over-year data, because that might actually provide more insight than a point in time. This looks like in February or something. I also am pretty concerned that when you say, well, we've done this 4 times. I don't know what that actually means, what improvements were actually planned. Our enrollment is down from year over year, yet our transportation costs have not been optimized. We just saw that, right? We don't have any good data. We haven't optimized. And every single year, both before and after I was on this Board of Ed, the answer is, well, we've tried it before. And I've yet to see anything as a community member or a Board of Ed member that's actually been tried to actually optimize routes. We say we have studies from the vendor that's actually selling us the software we're not using. I don't know if an RFP was done to find an optimization firm that could do this with us. So I think we need some additional data before we say, well, we're going to just do another study, because that's clearly not what we're looking for. We're looking for some actionable insights, and you need data to do that, right? So I'll just stop there. Sorry, Ken.
Sean has been very patient.
Okay.
More patient than usual.
Absolutely.
I'm going to make some comments and then I'm going to ask some questions, and they're kind of pointed, so I apologize in advance. I've been in the consulting world for my entire career. If somebody came to me with bad data and I could not turn that into an actionable report, I would not take the money. And I don't know what this cost our district, but it was too much. And I learned nothing from this report. I read it over the weekend. I watched the presentation tonight. We have learned nothing from this report. Turning to the district, we have bad data. My kids have been, I've been looking at the bus at the end of my driveway now for 18 years. The time has never changed. The route has never changed. How can that possibly be? And how do we not have data to give to a consultant to help us on this? So further to that, since I've learned nothing on this, and this is my second year on the board looking at these reports that have learned nothing, why are we paying this firm who isn't getting the job done? I Googled competitors to Edgelog. They exist. Maybe I'm not the decision maker, whoever is, perhaps this should go out to bid for somebody who can help us. Maybe I'm wrong. But beyond that, I feel like I wasted half an hour tonight, and that kind of makes me upset. I'll leave it at that for now. I'll come back with more questions after I let somebody else speak.
And that's you.
You said, I guess maybe I was going to ask a point of order. I think there are a lot of questions that we're asking. A lot of them need answers. I think there needs to be an opportunity for some back and forth conversation. Would it be appropriate to have a subcommittee of either the budget committee or the planning committee to focus specifically on the busing and the transportation, which would include, this contract, and, how would something like that happen? Or is that appropriate, or is that even something the board wants?
I see this being something that is the purview of the strategic planning committee, and not in its own little cell over here. It's transportation, but it's also tied to 4 tiers or 3 or 5 or 2. It's also tied to enrollment as we go forward, and tied to our school bus contract is up in another 2 years, 1 year.
2 years.
It's all one big puzzle. We can't solve 4-tier transportation tomorrow and then choose a 3-tier system, 6 months after that. So we have to look at it all together. So I would definitely charge the strategic planning committee to start with this as a big project, starting with the data.
If I could just ask, because there's questions around bad data. What questions were we looking to answer? And I guess, what are we looking to solve? When this was requested back in February of 2020, what were we looking to solve for? Were we looking to reduce costs? Were we looking to have kids arrive to school on time or early? Were we asking, what was the real question that we were looking to solve at that time?
At that time, the question was, how do we, for the least amount of money, get all of our students to school on time? And how do we know that this was the least amount of money?
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, I think, Susie, that the question continues to come up every year is why enrollment declines. Our topography hasn't changed in 300 years, as we learned today, and we don't have sidewalks, as we learned today, for that whole time. Why our transportation costs continue to rise even as fuel costs and other things go down. So it's not an equitable thing, and the question continued to build on. We get these one-timer reports with bad data, yet we don't take action to actually reduce and look at optimizing that cost structure, right? We, of course, want to get our students to school on time and safely every single day and follow the regulatory environment which we are in, but we have no real basis for why the cost continues to rise so dramatically when we have less people on those buses.
So, yep.
Okay, I'm just going to add on to Liz, and it's very quick. I kind of agree with what everyone was said, and I'm new to this board, so this is my point of view as a parent who's been watching this and being part of this and now part of this board. I think we're looking for efficiencies. We do need money. We're talking about reducing our teachers. We're always talking about reductions. when you have reductions in FTE teachers, they're directly impacting students. Yes, I think it was said we have great service provided by the 4 tiers, but there is huge inequality in our schools. We've heard parents talk about the education they receive. We talk about mental health workers. So every dollar that we save by correct data, as Liz has kept on pointing out, everything that we put in that is correct, it will help us save, hopefully, I mean, I'm not sure, I'm new to this, but I'm hoping we can save some kind of money that goes back and directly impacts the children. Yes, busing is important. I will not doubt that. But I think we need more, because at the end of the day, we've heard, I mean, our budget goes to a town vote, right? It is not about only the parents who are in RPS. And when we ask for raises, we want more impact directly towards the parents, towards the children. And, you know, we've heard our budget. We've talked about how COVID will create this need, a learning gap. It will be K to 12, mental health, education, you talk content, everything, you talk about it. But we need to find that money. There's only one bucket here. There's only so much we can do. So I think it's important that we find data, correct data that can lead to efficiencies. And I think that's where, and correct me, I mean, I've not been part of it, but I think that's what I would hope that our board is trying to achieve. Get correct information so that we can make efficiencies to help our students directly, because in the end, it's all about students. That's just something I would like to summarize. I hope that makes sense.
Margaret.
Let me just clarify one thing, that transportation, the cost of transportation that hits the budget goes up based on the contract that we have with First Student. The main increase year over year is the special education transportation. That's where our main increase is hitting.
But just to clarify, Dawn, isn't the contract for First Student done time in buses? So less students should be less time. Isn't that true?
No, not necessarily.
Hourly rate for those buses?
This
in the
particular,
contract?
the budget is based off of the type of bus and then the amount of hours that buses run.
That's right. The amount of hours that buses run, which should be directly correlating to the amount of students that it has to pick up and transport, right? If it's optimized, it has less time, more students,
Maybe more about miles.
Maybe, but we don't have the data, so who knows? So
Yeah, so you bring up a good point, and so that's why I asked, what were we looking to solve? Because there's a couple of layers to this, right? There's the question that you asked, which is how for the least amount of money, how do we get children to school safely and on time, right? That's the big question. Then there's, of course, the contract, right? And Dawn just brought up a couple of pieces, which is the number of hours, the type of bus. That perhaps if we're picking up less students, absolutely, we're going to have less hours. Or if we have to still plan, right, for those students, how does that, or does it have implications? Meaning whether or not we actually stop there, we have to understand what that's going to cost us relative to having hours and or buses. We may still have the exact same fleet, right? So the number of buses may be the exact same fleet. However, perhaps there's less hours. We save an hour or two a day. That could absolutely happen. And whether we elect to opt in or opt out may not have a bearing on that, but it'll still be less hours. This data was based, I think it must have been last September 2019 student data, Andy, that you worked with in February.
So whenever, I mean,
whatever data you have from the start of the year, right? From the fall 2019.
Well, we grabbed the data in about March of 2020, right? So however many student uploads you've done to be able to synchronize with your student information system, that would be as current as it was when we grabbed it in March.
Okay, so based on whatever data you had at that time, that's how you were able to report on whether or not we were optimizing the best that we could, correct? And I think what I'm also hearing is that the data that Rick is suggesting he has kept in the system, right? He has kept in the system for a number of reasons, whether or not it's because he wanted to make sure the intersection was available, or, children were, we were stopping at every home, whether or not they got on it. That's the data that you use at that time, because that's what you pulled from, correct? So
one clarifying point though is this goes back a little bit where we were asked to do an optimization, right? And we specifically did not want to do that optimization because we've had kind of, I mean, it was years ago, we did another kind of a look at bell times. And at that point, we realized some data was an issue. And so before we were even willing to take on any sort of optimization, we wanted to be able to do that data analysis and that efficiency assessment based on the data that we have to the best of our ability to help everybody understand what we're working with here and what data is available to us to be able to do any sort of optimization.
And
So that is one thing we did not want to do was an optimization until we knew what we were working with.
So in order to just clarify the garbage in, garbage out theory, the best data that we could provide you, let's just say at this point in time, is actual data. I mean, outside of COVID's a tricky year, right? But actual data. So if we were to, and I don't know how we do that, I'd have to look to Rick and Dawn on how we do that right now, given the year that we have. But let's just, right, because actual data now isn't actual data in September, but I think we could probably still try it. I'm going to ask Rick, can we still do that, Rick? Can we give Andy actual data, intersections that we don't stop at, let's not include, but actual data? Are we able to provide that to Edulog so that we can clear this piece up? Whether we go to committee or don't go to committee, I'm just saying at this point, are we able to provide that data?
I could go through all the runs and eliminate the stops that have zero population.
Would that have, but let's just clear that up. Not in COVID year, but let's say March. Would you have been able to clear up that data so that Andy could then have clean data coming in?
Yes, because I'm not making any differentiation between a COVID year and a normal year. All the students that are registered are on their bus.
But would this give us ridership information or potential ridership information?
Right. Need the ridership.
So can I just ask a clarifying question? So over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we've lost about 260 or so students from the district entirely. Is the data from those 260 kids who are no longer enrolled in Ridgefield Public Schools or their required transportation partners, is that still in the system as well? Because they used to have a student at them? Is that what you mean by the zero ridership? Or is it something different?
Yes, the student is deleted. Some of the stops may remain on the runs, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
But again, that's just one piece of the information that we need. We need that accurate ridership information. We need to know on Monday, 3 people got on that stop. On Tuesday, 6 people did. On Wednesday, 3 people did. I think from what I heard from the presentation today, that's the information that we need. My big fear personally is that this has been a year since I've been on the board where we talked about this, and the data is no better this year than it was last year. We're negotiating the contract again in 2 years, and my fear is that we're not going to be even prepared to negotiate a contract because we're not going to know what we actually need. Like, what are our actual transportation needs? And I understand that we're locked into this contract, so there may not be any potential savings for this contract. But when we negotiate the contract in 2 years, we need to have our routes optimized. We need to know, are we going to be able to save those 2 hours a day or 6 hours in a week? Is that one bus? Is that going to be any kind of savings on the contract going forward? So my fear is that we're not going to be able to do that. So I think we need to focus on the data integrity so that we can get this optimization done. And to Sean's point, whether we use Edulog, whether we do put it out to bid, I think Edulog did the data sufficiency analysis, found out that it was not sufficient. And so now we need to get the data to a point where we can analyze it or hire someone to analyze it so that we can optimize the routes. So we're ready to negotiate the contract when that time comes.
Well, then we also have to factor in what student gets driven to school in the morning but takes the bus home in the afternoon. There's
Absolutely. We need to find a way to be able to track actual ridership of the buses. And I understood that's what the software was intended to do. That could be my misinterpretation.
Andy, the
John?
answer to that is correct, right? The software is intended to do that.
My turn.
Correct.
So
Yes.
I'm going to go in the Wayback Machine. About 3 years ago, a previous superintendent slash IT manager told us we were going to have wonderful GPS capability on the buses that allowed parents to see exactly where the bus is and know when they're going to be at their driveway. And presumably that same capability would give us actionable data that we can use in this analysis. What went so horribly wrong and why don't we have that? Don't all talk at once.
Sean, I'm not sure who historically was here during that time. So I'd have to.
Oh, I was pretty clear who it was. He
No,
was
I
setting
know
up
who
the-
the superintendent was.
But yeah, but we were told that this capability was coming. It
Yeah.
was actually published to parents and then it went away. Now, is that an edgelog piece of software and capability? And if so, what happened?
I believe,
Go
if
ahead.
I'm not mistaken, it was a collaboration of Edgelog and First Students software.
Okay, that answers the first part. What happened?
That I don't know.
Because that would be a great way to get real data, wouldn't it? Edgelog folks, any insight?
You know, and I'm not sure, I don't have the history with First Student, but First Student does have GPS related information, right, that they offer, right, a lot of times in their contracts, and this is not Edgelog related, right? I believe like they have Zonar GPS data on their buses and they offer First Focus. There's a number of different packages that they talk about that could be that parent portal. Now we offer a parent portal application that does, you know, several of the things you're talking about, ride registration components, parent communication so they can tell you ETA or bus pickup. But those pieces of software are nothing that, you know, RPS contracts through us for, right? We have the routing and scheduling. We do have some GPS that pulls information from First Student's Zonar systems, but First Student, I mean, we don't have a parent portal. First Student does offer that. I'm not sure on your history if that's where that communication came from.
So Dr. De Silva, who can find out what this was, what was committed to parents, and what went wrong?
Yeah, I think you're speaking of a time when Dr. Miller was here. I can go back and look at the history. I'm just wondering how cell service in this town would even provide that capability. I'm not sure what was
AT&T
promised or
has
what
wonderful
was.
coverage in most of Ridgebury now and most of town now.
Yeah,
I don't think it's as big as an issue as it was 3 years ago.
yeah.
We have police radios that now have coverage in 95% of town, inside a house with a handy talkie. I'm pretty sure that we can crack the code on this one.
So we can crack it for sure. How the history, I don't know the answers to those questions, Sean, but we can certainly try to figure it out. And I think it's certainly an opportunity to talk about it in committee. I'm a little bit, and I guess I personally need to fully understand the two parallels we're trying to draw, which with the ridership, and we've had this question, I've had this question with Andy before in our sessions prior to this meeting, is the connection between, let's just say we're able to optimize fully, right? And perhaps it's a better discussion for committee, but we're able to optimize fully and we know exactly who's getting on those school buses. We know every child that's getting on every day. And then we have a whole group of kids that aren't. And that group of kids, whether it's 2 or 10, right? 2 or 10, and they identify, okay, now I want to get on the school bus. And the bus in which they would need to get on, what the shift looks like for everyone riding that bus. So in my mind, I'm thinking about a kid that comes elementary school midway through the stop, and now we're picking up that little person. Does that mean that that bus is going to be 2 minutes later to school? And all those kids that are picked up thereafter are going to be 2 minutes later, and or the kids that were picked up before now need to be picked up 2 minutes earlier, and what those implications are like. And fully, I don't understand it. I know that this is a challenge for a lot of districts.
Yeah, I feel like we're reinventing the wheel, and that's terrifying to me. There are thousands of districts in this country. There are probably hundreds that have topology similar to ours, but it appears that, we've been in business here for a long time. We still don't have a clue, and that's terrifying
Yeah,
to me.
I understand the topography piece. I'm actually, that variable, I'm not seeing it as problematic as much as I'm seeing the problem being what happens when we've identified ridership one way. And again, this is the cost savings is here, but let's just say we've identified ridership this way, and then we have 2 or 3 students who elected not to ride, but now are electing ride. Doesn't mean that we don't study this, but that's
No, but you can if then this to death, but have exceptions. That's normal part of operating.
Yeah,
But
and yeah,
you also need to be able to say, if this, then it costs X. If that, it costs Y. And we don't have any data to even start that discussion.
Sean, I agree with you. With the one piece that we do have to keep in mind is we identify how many buses we need. We can't all of a sudden, outside of our contract, say we need 2 more buses. And perhaps we can, but if they don't have them available to us, or 1 more bus, that's a whole other challenge. So I just, and
I
again,
think that's where you go into contract negotiations with data and contingency plans, because every contract I've ever signed has a contingency on volume, right? So that it's applicable in, right? So I do think that this kind of data is critical going into those, but even right now, I mean, this is an area that does not have direct educational outcomes other than to get kids to school, which is obviously a huge one. And I think it also provides us an opportunity to start to platform on the legislature if we have excessive costs because we're picking up kids that are never going to sit on a bus. So there are a lot of uses for this data that, we keep finding constraints on why we shouldn't look at this, yet we still have stops sitting in there that are being planned for that haven't had kids in them in 3 or 4 years.
I'm going to make a suggestion.
Agreed.
I'm going to make a suggestion that we're not going to provide a solution this evening. We do know that before we can even make a decision about what to do with the data, we need to have the data. So let's leave this meeting with the understanding that we'll come back and revisit this maybe in our second March board meeting to look at where we are and what we need to do to be able to collect accurate data and a timeline to do that first piece that we'll need for doing anything with it after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kathleen, you have a comment?
I want to add this, and I know people don't want to hear it, but it's an opportunity. And since I've been on the board, it has consistently been spoken about. And let's look at an opportunity as we look at educational outcomes of busing. I continue to hear again and again and again, particularly about our elementary schools being on different start times. As we gather this data and get good data, this will, I would hope that this would lead to some more discussion about being able to do that. So I just wanted to, Dr. De Silva, although that wasn't at that time, it is constantly, even tonight it was brought up in terms of the start time. So I think that needs to be woven into the discussion. If we have good data, maybe we can optimize it and make a better educational outcome for our elementary students, as we've been hearing. So I just want to leave it at that. Doesn't need to be the discussion now, but I didn't want to leave without talking about it.
I just very quickly, I want to agree with what Kathleen says, because we are talking about equality. We're talking about efficiencies. We should look at even our late school elementary times. I was going through the data and I see bus runs that are pretty late and the ones that are early. And I do understand they could be outsourced students, the late high school bus. So of course there are questions, there are some explanations to this, but we should look at equality for the later elementary times. Schools and our high school times, of course. I mean, if you're looking at data and you are looking at how we're going to be efficient in this, why not look at the whole holistic picture? So it is an opportunity. I do agree with Kathleen. That's it. That's the quick thing.
Ken's final word.
No. I just wanted to clarify. What are we discussing in March, a month from now?
I was just suggesting that we ask the administration to bring to the board meeting late March and an assessment of where they are with being able to provide ridership level data, and what the next steps and timeline to getting that piece put together, because we can't really do anything else until we have that. So I thought we'd start with that piece.
Okay. Again, I'm just very cognizant, and I guess this is still the relatively new to the board, is just breaking down the 24 months into, or the 2 years into 24 months. Now we're going to have 23 months once we decide yes or no we can get the data. Then is that another month to get that data? Now we're down to 22 months. Things don't seem to move as quickly, given everything. It's a constraint. It's a resource constraint. I absolutely understand that. But are there conversations so that's great for that meeting. My concern was that, are there conversations that can happen over the next 4 weeks that might help move that along, rather than waiting and for a month to have an initial conversation and then another month? So that's more where my questions are coming from, which may perhaps can be addressed at a committee level. Or I'm not sure, but that's my concern.
Margaret?
Sorry, I agree with many of the comments, especially Kathleen and Tina, what they said. I just wanted to say, I was wondering if perhaps to parallel path, because I hear you, Ken, in terms of, the timeline ticking down for 24 months. Perhaps one of those parallel paths can be getting to the question that Susie asked, which is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And perhaps we can be having some of those conversations starting out, whether it's in the committee level or whether it's at the board level. It's, are we looking to, yes, we're always looking to save money, but are we looking to really solve for getting those kids in the elementary level onto the same tier, so that it's just 3 tiers of busing? Again, we look at, there's a lot of times here where kids are getting picked up really early, earlier than 6 o'clock, and getting dropped off past 5 o'clock at night. So I wonder if we can philosophically, as a board, talk about what is that problem that we're trying to solve, so that when we have that accurate data, we can then be using that to help us solve the problem.
So just to add, just to be explicitly clear, the problem that I'm asking about and trying to solve is the fact that there's almost a 4% increase, even though our enrollment is down in transportation, even though our enrollment is down. And the increase from 2018 through this year is over $1 million, even though our enrollment went down 200 kids. So very explicitly, just pure numbers. I think if we add more scope to this in terms of tiering and stuff, we're never going to get to the data that says, why do our costs keep going up for both coordination of and execution of our transportation year over year, even though we have less people to transport? So I'm just going to stop there and say that's the question I personally would love to have solved with this data.
And I think wherever we go with tiers, with anything, with start times, tiers, anything else, it all depends on the data. That's why I was starting with just setting that aside as short-term goal, get the data that we would need to answer any of the other questions. And if we can do it before the end of March, that's great. But I was also trying to be, cognizant of the fact that this team does have a day job as well, and they're working through budget season. So I don't know how much we can reasonably expect to accomplish in such a short time frame.
We'll do our best.
Let's take it from there.
We'll do our best, and we'll work towards it. Yeah.
Anything else on this topic or for the people from Edgelog before we move on? Thank you very much for the presentation. I did find it useful. I know that you were hamstrung with some of the data issues, but there were some pieces that I found useful for us going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the key thing for us is that data too, right? If we know riders or ridership numbers at stop locations, we can work with it, but we need to know that who's riding, when and where. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving right along. Discussion item art at the elementary schools.
Okay, so Dr. Hanaway is here alongside the 6 elementary, I do it every time, 6 elementary principals to share out the work that they've done over the past really just about a week and a half, 2 weeks around it was clear that the Board of Education and that the public needed to hear more. And so what you're going to hear, I think, is some short-term work and perhaps some long-term, and we welcome questions from from the board around any aspect of the work that they are going to share out tonight. So Dr. Hanaway is going to share her screen.
Yep. Okay, Susie, can you see my screen? All right. All right, good evening, everybody. So I'm happy to be here tonight with my 6 elementary colleagues who I felt lucky to work on this with, even though art is not something that normally would fall in my wheelhouse. This was a great experience for me to connect with some of our gen ed colleagues. So, as Susie alluded to before, jumping off from the January 25th Board of Ed meeting, we approached this topic, and I think the way that I perceived it was an analysis to come back to the board with a recommendation for next steps. And so what we propose is a 2-step process. We worked on, first and foremost, identifying priorities that could be for the immediate. And we worked on identifying these priorities with our 3 elementary art teacher colleagues. And so the first step in the process is that we believe that we can address now the priorities of improving upon the quality of the experience of students within their grade level art class. Secondarily, increasing the art teachers' dedicated time to support art program responsibilities outside of the direct contact time in class with students. And then the third priority of building in additional differentiated art class experiences. And that could be referenced as something like Art Leap or Rise Art. And so there were many other priorities that we identified that are valued connected to the elementary art program, but these were the 3 that we all as a group believed that would be most important and feasible to address first. The second step that we believe is necessary is after this school year, there needs to be a thorough and collaborative analysis of all elementary, depending on the school, sometimes it's called essentials, sometimes it's called specials, but all of the elementary essentials or specials programs outside of the budget process to analyze philosophical beliefs about what the elementary experience should be, assured curricular components, the elementary master schedule design, what they believe about direct and indirect contact time, and then lastly, what the FTE allocation is. So I think in a way, the notion of FTE allocation tonight is kind of coming to the forefront of the discussion when really the FTE allocation should come as a result of this second step, which is really what we believe needs to happen across all specials and essentials. Corey Gillette is joining us tonight, and we're so excited. I'm so excited that she's here. And then obviously Corey's work and the elementary director has to be very, very closely involved with this analysis into next year across all the elementary specials. Okay, so the process that's taken place since January 25th is that there have been multiple collaborative work sessions between myself, the elementary art teachers, either in different groups. I've met individually with some of the art teachers. I've met with the group of art teachers, just the principals, all of us together. So there's been many conversations in this short period of time. We've conducted work sessions that included an analysis of each component of the previous and current art programs, the current use of the art teachers' assigned times within their 2 schools. We have looked at identifying the priorities that can be addressed with a potential change to the art teacher or program model for this coming school year. And then lastly, how art teachers could be allocated and assigned across the 6 elementary schools, given different iterations of what we're going to call FTEs, which are full-time equivalents, which is a full-time staff member. And then lastly, all of this has led to a recommendation, my recommendation that I'm going to make to you tonight that can address the priorities that have been identified while also allowing room for a larger analysis to take place next year by the assistant superintendent for the entire program. I was very mindful that where we are in this step is, I believed it was important to create something that allowed room for growth and room for shifting into next school year. I don't think it would be prudent or responsible to make a decision now without looking ahead. And so that's part of where my rationale will be when I get to my recommendation. So just by way of background, in the 1920 school year, We had 6 art teachers, 1 assigned to each elementary school. Teachers taught between 3 and 5 periods each day, depending on the day and the 6-day rotation. Elementary schools have the 6-day rotation. They're not a 5-day schedule. They had multiple art program support periods per day, and students received approximately 40 art periods in a year. This school year with 3 art teachers, teachers teach 6 periods in a day. They do not have a designated art program support period on most days, and students receive approximately 30 art sessions within a year. So I want to make clear factors we kept in mind as we did our analysis. So COVID has made this analysis even more complicated because there are 2 things that are different for the child this year that wouldn't have been the case. Number 1, art is traveling to the classroom, so that art on a cart model. So that feels very different. And as does the length of the art period is shorter than it would have been because we reduced our elementary school day by 40 minutes. So when you think about how kids experience art differently this year, you know, we had to be really careful to say, can we say that had they not been on a cart? Could we say that had they not been 40 minutes shorter in the school day and their art period shorter? In some cases, we could answer that question, those questions cleanly, and other times we couldn't because we really just don't know and it's too subjective. But to the extent that we could, we tried not to let these 2 factors sway or confuse our analysis. You know, best case, I'm knocking on wood scenario that we're not having to do those things starting this coming school year. And then the other factor that we kept in mind is, again, the elementary specials rely heavily on the use of this 6-day rotation schedule, as well as the trimester rotation. And I mean, not just for art in years past, but PE, library, media, and music. I did not believe it's prudent at this time to disrupt the 6-day rotation or the trimester model for the other essentials or specials periods. And so everything that we looked at as far as analysis stayed within those 2 parameters. Again, I'm not looking to redesign. I don't think it's smart right now to redesign the entire elementary master schedule design. Okay, so I want to put out there what was considered and rejected, because if you think about, if you think about metrics and you think about exactly the number of sections and periods in a day and a week, if you were to do that to a T, this is what this is the exact amount, as we know, with projected enrollment and projected sections into next year. So for elementary schools, we need a 0.8 equivalent of an art teacher. Farmingville would need a 0.7, and Veterans Park, being our smallest predicted number of sections next year, would be a 0.6. I am not recommending this because we will not be able to recruit and retain quality art teachers. And if you spread these 4 across, and that's 4.5 FTE, I'll talk a little bit later why that's a problematic amount for 6 schools and why when we modeled that 4.5 teachers out across 6, why it caused a lot of problems. But to share these teachers in the above allocations, really caused a tremendous amount of inefficiencies. And each teacher, in order to do it this way, we would have to make sure that each teacher would be in their designated school 6 out of 6 days. And that would mean a partial teacher every day for those 6 days, but nobody there full time. And so this was something I just want to put out there in terms of if someone were to ask, well, what exactly your elementary schools are not the same sizes. What exactly does each school need? This is the exact number that each one would need. Okay, so allow me to, before jumping into the recommendation, which is 4 teachers for 6 schools, you already know what 6 teachers across 6 schools is. I didn't model that out. You're already very familiar with it. We went through every iteration between 3 and 6. We modeled 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 4, 8, 5, and 6. And so we went through positives and challenges within each one. We blocked out FTE assignments and schedules for each one. And this is what I'm recommending for this coming school year. So 4 teachers for 6 schools would mean teachers would be teaching 5 periods in the day. The positives to this direction is that it allows for dedicated art program support time. And what that could be used for is ensuring that there is not negative slack, so to speak, from our previous presentation, that there is enough opportunity for preparation in between periods and for teachers to have everything ready to go for class that they need, knowing that with little ones, we can't rely on them to help us with preparation as you can with older students. It increases the transition time in between classes compared with current. We would have 3 teachers three schools would have 1 art teacher assigned to it. That wouldn't be a full-time FTE, but at least 3 of the schools would have only one art teacher traveling to it. There would be minimal midday travel for 2 of the teachers, and that's that deadhead time they were talking about in the last one, the travel time in between 2. And that the travel time would really be to go to do Art Leap at another school. It allows for availability for Rise Art and Art Leap. And it also allows for program support, like I mentioned before, multiple program support periods across a 6-day cycle. What the biggest challenge here in this model is that it does not guarantee increased art time for every student in the school. In order to do that, you need to have an art teacher there for 6 days of the 6-day rotation, which is either 6 teachers or those partial FTEs that I described a couple slides ago. My recommendation is to take an initial step. And part of that is because the individual class experiences, as well as the entire school's experience, will be better as a result of increasing to 4 because of these positive factors. The student's actual experience in class. And that's a direct question I asked the art teachers, saying, if we move to 4 and if you had these positives, do you believe students would have a better experience and more enhanced experience, a deeper experience than they're currently having in class? And they answered yes. I'm not going to quote that they thought this was the best model necessarily, but they did believe it would enhance the students' experience in class. 3 of the schools would have 2 part-time art teachers. So that would mean that the balancing of schedules would have to be such that they can't be in the building at the same time because the art room can't be used by 2 teachers at once. That's doable. We've mapped that out. And it could be in a rare circumstance that a grade level might have 2 art teachers assigned to it. So for example, as I put here, 1 art teacher could be assigned to 2 5th grade classes and the 2nd art teacher assigned to the 3rd. I think generally we found a way to avoid that, but it is possible. And again, 1 teacher may have to travel to 2 additional schools solely for Art Leap. We thought if someone was going to have to travel during the day, instead of traveling to pick up, 1 section at a school that they're never at, it'd be better off if they picked up Art Leap because it's a more of a flexible type of support. So this is just a sample of how the assignments could break down. So forgive me for the visual here for a second, and this is a sample. Each of these colors are a different teacher. So if you see here, Barlow Mountain, Branchville, Ridgebury, and Scotland potentially could only have 1 person assigned to it. They're still not a full-time because as you see this Barlow person also has to spend a little bit of time at Farmingville. Same thing, Ridgebury and VP and SES and VP. But it's proportionate to the size of the school. It builds in Rise Art and Art Leap. And it minimizes midday travel. And I think the biggest piece that's the issue when you get to the 4.5 into the 5 models, 4.5 teachers for 6 schools or 5 teachers for 6 schools, you still don't guarantee art increase for all students. Only certain grade levels would have more art. So you don't get the benefit of saying, well, I have more FTE. Can all kids get more art? No, they can't. And then you would have, at least in the 5 model, you would have 2 teachers teaching at 3 different schools. And every which way we sliced it, the closer you get to 6, the more that fraction breaks down. And really that's a very tough experience for both the schools and the teacher. So that's another reason why you don't see that as part of the proposals here. I want to pause for a second because I've gone through a lot of stuff relatively quickly. Do my principal colleagues, are there any of the details that I failed to include in some of that analysis? If any of you want to unmute and jump in. Or you're all just praying that I don't ask you to do that? Okay, I'm not going to, we'll wait for the questions. Okay, so my rationale behind the recommendation, again, it does address these earlier identified priorities, improving upon the student's experience within class, increasing the art teacher's dedicated time to support art program responsibilities. They're teaching, not 6 periods a day, but 5. And it does build in additional differentiated art class experiences within Rise Art and Art Leap. Again, you cannot increase student contact time for all kids unless an art teacher is in the building 6 out of 6 days of schedule, which is either 6 art teachers or the partials for every school. If you try to take those partials, add them together to 4.5, you can't split them. The travel time kills you. It absolutely kills you in there. And then I do believe this is a responsible initial step for this coming school year, not only in terms of the long-term planning, but fiscally. And it provides, like I said, an initial step while allowing room for further potential enhancements in the future as part of a comprehensive elementary specials process. And then I'll take questions from there. We'll take questions from there.
Who wants to start us off here? Okay, Ken.
Sorry, first of all, thank you for taking the time. I know this is a really, this budget season, so it's really busy. Thank you for taking on this additional responsibility. My first comment is I love using the term essentials over specials because I do think that all of these are essential, again, to our vision of a graduate, to a well-rounded human being. So I would like to propose that they're all called essentials across all schools. All right, separately. My question is it's similar to what I've had in the past, and it's, I guess, more general, but and the way that I phrased it before is I'm going to phrase it again, is why was art targeted for the budget cuts? And we'll go back to the example you gave in 1920, in the school years 19 to 2020. Why we had 6 art teachers, we cut that down to 3 art teachers. Why were the cuts chosen in art? So why were the other essentials prioritized over art? I know you didn't like it when I referred to that as prioritizing, but when you have a bucket of money and you're looking at your specials and you're making a cut, you have to prioritize one over the other, and that's what happened. So this didn't really get to that part of my question, and sort of what drives that is if you look at the budget for music, if you include instrumental, we essentially have 8 FTEs, which is, I guess, the 2 instrumental are shared across the schools, but each elementary school has 1 full-time or 1 FTE music teacher. And so really what I wanted to get at is how many periods are those teachers teaching? And I know you're probably going to address that in your look forward when you're looking at all of the essentials, but this was more for just a point of knowledge for me when I'm making it, when I'm analyzing this part of the budget, is I would like to know how many periods are those 6 FTEs teaching in the school on any particular 6-day rotation. So that was a question that I had originally that wasn't addressed here. Mm-hmm. And that would help me personally get to where I think I need to get in this part of the budget.
So I can begin to answer, but then I'll ask Susie and my principal colleagues to jump in too, because their knowledge of the history is way better than mine. But I would just say, as a reference point, library media was in this position a few years ago. Same process happened with library media, I think in the 15-16 or 16-17 school year, roughly. And the board, and again, economy being a different place at that time, budgets being in a different place at that time, the board went through this process or a process not too dissimilar, or public conversation not too dissimilar, and opted to maintain the FTEs for library media at the elementary level as they had. No, I did not include comparatives for the other essentials areas tonight, but we can give you answers to some of those questions. So I don't know which, I'm going to quote the wrong numbers off of music off the top of my head. So I don't know which elementary principal wants to jump in, maybe a larger and a smaller.
So I can jump in real quick. When we look at music, their schedule is very similar to art when we talk about the essential class experience. However, music also has band, which there would be 1 additional class of all 5th grader music instrument players. They also have chorus for 4th and 5th graders. So that's an additional class, not all year long, but usually 5 or 6 weeks in the winter, and then again 5 or 6 weeks in the spring. And then they also do lessons. So those are broken up by different band instruments. So that could be anywhere between 7 and 9 additional classes a week, or on a 6-day schedule. I'm sorry, on a 6-day schedule. So their class time is the same as at our teacher last year, looking at last year. Class time was the same as our teacher. They saw the same amount of classes. Then they had those additional classes on top of that.
And so my question is, and it was then, is how many students are participating? So for example, art might touch every single student in a school, where chorus is going to touch a much smaller percentage.
Right. So now all kids have music, K through 5. They also had that double dip of music like they did in art last year, right? And then all 4th graders have chorus. So anywhere between 40 and 65 kids. And then all 5th graders have chorus. And then, you know, depending on the year, band, I'd say, is about 50% to 70% of kids in 5th grade only for band.
Jamie, when you speak of the double dip, that's 7.5 hours for any grade level per year. Is that correct? So it's an additional trimester, 10 sessions in one trimester. So a trimester, 60 sessions, 60 days. Our students would receive 10 sessions within one trimester. That's the difference from this proposal, the four teachers from the 6. So 7.5 hours approximately per year per grade level. And so what you're saying, Jamie, is the music still receives that 7.5 hours. And then that other piece that they had is the chorus band and then the individual band lessons. The Art Leap and the Rise Art are another piece that we had that could not be consistently applied. So therefore, in this plan, those 2 pieces are added in. And, you know, Jamie, the question around other special areas has come up several times. And I know when we all met, you were all able, and I don't know if it's best you or someone else to articulate why not PE, why, you know, why not music, why not whatever else, and library media again, right? Why not? And there was a little bit of a history, and then there was a reason why not.
And it has to do with the 6-day, much of it also has to do with the 6-day cycle and rotation. Right.
I could speak a little to what Dr. De Silva was just mentioning, why art as opposed to some of the other essentials. Physical education, PE, has traditionally been two different days within a 6-day cycle, or even before we went to a 6-day, when many of us were still 5-day. This rotation was 2 PE, 1 art, 1 music, and 1 library. That was 5 days, but PE was always twice in a cycle. And the reason for that is the state of Connecticut has guidelines around recommended physical activity that they want for children. And so traditionally districts often have, you know, more PE than some of the other essentials. That's historically been the case, and we've maintained that. Library media, the difference between library media and art is that library media also has an additional function in the school building, and that is tech integration. So in addition to when the children go to the library as part of their essentials rotation, we also have time on the library media's schedule for going into classrooms, pushing in and supporting technology integration in areas like in our social studies and science classes, in our nonfiction reading classes. So they have a lot of responsibility in helping our classroom teachers and the children integrate technology into their days and into their work. So that's an additional responsibility on top of just when the children come into the library for taking out books or into the maker space where they work on STEM projects, et cetera. So that library role has an additional function which takes up more of their FTE. Music, as Jamie explained, in addition to the rotation, has the lessons that they teach and the chorus and band, all of which is required to help the students be prepared for middle school and high school and the levels of proficiency in music that are required as part of the K-12 vertical curriculum, which actually, is something that is going to continue to be looked at, as Liz said, when they look at all the essentials. So that kind of helps to explain where art has the specials rotation and the additional enhancements like the art show and the art leap, but it left it in a position where that would have the least impact, in that those other roles for the other essentials didn't exist in the art role, if that can help give it a little context.
It does. Thank you. It does help with the context. I don't support it. So, but thank you for the explanation.
Nora?
Okay, I hope you can hear me. My internet's been really glitchy, but thank you for the presentation and the proposal. I appreciate the attempt, but I'm really frustrated right now because I feel like, we have to keep analyzing. We're saying we might need a larger analysis next year when we actually know what works, and that is having an art teacher at each of the elementary schools. The truth is, we tried this and it didn't work. The people have spoken and we're not listening. I believe we need to return to an art teacher at each school for a few reasons. Number one, the kids need art more than ever now. Parents desperately want art, and they are constituents for the most part. In addition to that, the art teachers are not able to deliver the superior art education that Ridgefield knows and loves. And the issue of inequity is really a non-starter, because every elementary school is full of inequities in every classroom. And one of the most wonderful things about Ridgefield is the neighborhood school environment. And having that art teacher is very special, especially for those many, many children and families where that is where those kids really thrive. So I would strongly suggest that that becomes a new consideration and a new proposal for how we are going to make that work.
So if I may, so what I think I just heard you say though, Nora, is that the 6 art teachers is the proposal that you're suggesting, what we had, right?
Yes.
Okay, Rachel?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. My first question was brought up and partially answered, but it's, what was the reaction of our current 3 elementary school art teachers on these recommendations for next year? I did hear that they said that this would enhance the student experience in art class, but do they feel that this recommendation would be better than the situation that they found themselves in this year? So that would be my first question.
I gotta be frank, I'm not comfortable speaking for other people. Better than their current experience this school year? I believe the answer to that is yes. Yes, I met with them again this afternoon, and to review it and to get their feedback. There was mixed feedback, I can tell you that. But I'm not comfortable speaking on their behalf. I did, like I said, ask them, if we went to 4, would this improve the quality of students' experience in class? And they said yes. But I'm not going to, necessarily, because I don't know, Rachel, they may have nuances to how they answer that question to you, and it's not fair for me to be their voice. I made my own recommendation.
Yeah, I also think that there's something to be said, and we've had this conversation in a group, or and I'm glad to have it publicly. People are going to advocate on behalf of their passion, and I would hope that our teachers would want to teach art as much as possible. Same that I would expect music teachers to want to teach music as much as possible, and math teachers to teach math as much as possible. That said, I would hope that they would be advocating on behalf of their craft, and that's what we would expect. ultimately we're charged with a lot of different things. And so the issue of equity came up, and equity can be designed or can be defined in lots of different ways. So if we're looking at a child's instructional day, they're expected to get through a curriculum in mathematics, a curriculum in phonics, a curriculum in social studies, curriculum in music and art and everything else. If we could have started there, that would have been really helpful, right? But currently we don't have a memorialized curriculum in art or in, quite frankly, in some other areas. That's work that has to be done, because when you look to how can we achieve our curriculum, how many hours do we need? We can't do that work. We can't do that math, right? So ultimately what we looked at is how much art did they have in the past? How much art are they getting now? And what are they losing? So what are they losing? How much are they missing? Right now, they will miss, in this proposal tonight, they will miss the 7.5 hours a year, every grade level, a year that they've received in years past. We did not look at this and say, okay, does 5th grade art curriculum, should they be receiving 3 more hours than, let's say, kindergarten? Even though we'd like to be able to have that conversation, we can't do that because we don't have a curriculum that says, okay, this is what that looks like. It doesn't mean the teachers aren't teaching. They are not teaching to their standards, but we don't have that. And so ultimately, Rachel, yes, I think our teachers are going to be passionate about art as others would, but we're looking at it wider, and we are looking at it, from a financial lens too. You may hear us in a year from now, not saying that we want more art teachers, but maybe we would propose something else. Maybe we'd be proposing STEM, or we'd be proposing science labs or world language or whatever the case may be. But ultimately right now, we looked at what makes sense fiscally and what brings a meaningful program to children, what brings back some of those important experiences that we heard our families say that they were missing, whether it was COVID or non-COVID. We looked at that. We knew that Art Leap was one of those experiences, and we knew that Rise Art was one of those experiences. Outside of that, and for our art teachers, they felt like they needed additional time to support the planning and breaking down of art, materials, et cetera, in order to be best prepared for classes so that our children could get a meaningful experience. That's what we did. We also know what children are going to be missing. So if you're looking at 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, they'll be missing 7.5 hours of art a year compared to what they had.
And I have 2 more questions, Jonathan, if it's okay on
Go
that.
ahead.
So are there any challenges that are not listed here? For example, any disruption to other classes, for instance, or teacher schedules for extra support?
No, we listed out every challenge that we predictably or reliably could think of. I'm sure there are others that, like we experienced this year, we didn't know until we were in it. But everything that we could think of that was reliable across the 6 schools, we listed.
And then I just have a question on Rise Art. So our children who may have access to Rise Art with this recommendation for next year, what are they currently enrolled in during this time? And then my follow-up to that would be, will families of Rise students have flexibility in opting in or out of Rise Art to appropriately meet the individual needs of their children?
So all students in the school participate within their gen ed art class. Rise Art is an additional. In some cases, it's happening this year, but it's not uniform. It really depends on the individual school, the schedule, the student schedule. There's not enough flexibility to make it consistent. So it's kind of catch as catch can. And parents have always had the option of not having their child participate if they chose not to, or if for some reason there's a more appropriate use of that student's time. It's never a requirement. The vast majority participate.
Dr. Hanaway, just to take a minute and describe Art Leap too, because that's a little bit different than what I think was described in the past, because while it's open to all students, not all students in any particular school or any particular grade, your point, Rachel, elect to access Art Leap. So it's an extra. And so at times it was open to 5th grade only because of the number of children, let's say. And in other schools, it may have been open to 4th and 5th grade. There were times in which this was offered before the start of the school day because families didn't want their children pulled out of other areas, right? There's only so many hours in a school day. So they didn't want their children pulled out of other areas. So therefore they elected to do something in the morning if the art teacher was available. I don't know if I missed anything with that, Dr. Hanaway or principals with Art Leap. So that's not a program that all students experience. It could have had 5 or 6 children. It could have had 12 children. It could have had times in which there weren't any children.
Mm-hmm. It's an extension. It's an opportunity for extension past the classroom in terms of their grade level art experience.
Thank you. And then, oh, I'm sorry, Jonathan. I can let someone else go and then.
I'll circle through the room a little bit.
Okay.
Tina?
Okay, first of all, I just want to thank every one of you for bringing this together. I'm sure it was not easy. It's budget season. You have a lot going on. So thank you, truly. I'm going to look at this a little differently. I'm not the expert. You all are, obviously. So I trust whatever you presented makes sense. But my questions are, parents, we've heard about parents. We've seen the petition. We're seeing parents send in emails. We're hearing from them constantly. They're passionate about this. This something means to them. So I know, Liz, you talked about, you looked at 6 teachers and it wouldn't mean more art. And, you know,
it would mean for 6 teachers.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, you know, this is the reality, as Dr. De Silva mentioned, fiscally responsible. What does adding 6 art teachers mean? Does that mean we take something away from our budget? Does it increase our budget? Because in the end, this will go to the Board of Finance. You know, we've heard our Board of Finance say they can only support X% and it will all go to the mill rate. So, I mean, in the end, and I keep saying this, but I've learned it very hard through this budget process for so many years, it does go to a town vote and the town votes to pass this budget, right? No matter what we feel. So we can passionately advocate. And I think if you want 6 art teachers, we should definitely look how that looks. We should be looking at how this looks, how 6 art teachers will add to our schedules. How will that add so many X minutes to the kids' day? Because, you know, 30 minutes.
Well, I mean, we know what 6 looks like.
Okay, so
it's
if we
last
could
year.
share. Yeah, okay, so it'll be like that. But, you know, I wasn't there, so I'm just thinking about it. But I'm thinking, what does it look fiscally? What does that add to our budget? And if we do add it, are we thinking of some reduction somewhere? I'm just being really practical about this. Take away, I understand the passion, I support the passion, I understand what the teachers say, I understand what the principals say. So I'm just going to take a totally different view. Does that make sense? Like, I'm trying to be fiscally responsible for all our community here and ask the question, which I'm sure everybody's like, it won't come up, but it will come up. I mean, we all know it's going to come up, and Dr. De Silva will be, you know, it'll come up to her.
You know, so Dawn's on the line. It's probably about $230,000 to add 3 art teachers, somewhere around there. If I were to take the average $77,000 art teacher, I think the other piece that we had to remember, though, I think that it's important that we stay true to this, because ultimately, if I'm a teacher at one school, I am going to have, if I'm at Veterans Park versus Branchville, it's not about equity and how much art even, right? Because I have 5 elementary principals here that are also 6 elementary principals here that are also, I'm going to get tasered every time I say 5, that are responsible for not only supporting art curriculum, but every other part of the child's day, right? And so if they're going to make a decision at Veterans Park, as an example, to say, okay, we're going to have 14 hours of art versus another school that has 9 hours of art, you're losing those extra hours somewhere. Who's making the decision on where that somewhere goes? One art teacher that lands at Veterans Park is going to teach 3 sections a day, perhaps, and another one's going to teach 5 at another school. So the reason we're not proposing 6 is not because we're placing a value judgment on the art program at all. And I think that's a really important. There isn't anyone who's been an elementary teacher, principal, leader that doesn't care about creativity on the part of children. And by the way, children experience art formally, and then they of course experience it informally, right? And field trips and all of those other pieces are an incredibly important part of a child's day. There's no one on this line that's coming into a meeting and saying, we don't believe that this is an important part of a child's experience. There's probably a lot of other things that we believe are an important part of a child's experience, but we're trying to navigate it all. And at the same time, being fiscally responsible and seeing what makes sense. And ultimately, it doesn't make sense to put 6 art teachers in 6 schools that are very significantly different sized and say, okay, we're not going to make, what are we going to make what are we going to identify as a difference here? One gets what and the other one gets something else. That doesn't feel fair, right? It doesn't feel fair for the art kid at Branchville that would love to have 3 sessions of art in a 6-day cycle or 2 sessions of art every trimester and doesn't get that because they're in the larger school. So, it's complicated, and I know we all care. We wouldn't be, having this conversation if we didn't, and we've thought about it a lot of different ways. And so, ultimately, I think what's really hard about this is I can't tell you that they're not getting to blank in their curriculum at this point. I don't have that to give you. And so I can't tell you what they're missing other than hours. They're missing 7.5 hours a year, every grade level.
And I have a question on that. Where did those 7.5 hours go?
Well, they have less sessions in a year. So they went from 40
Right,
to 30.
So what are those 7.5 hours now used for? They were art 2 years ago.
Yeah,
What are those 7.5 hours now?
I can imagine that the elementary principals will talk about curriculum, right, and other content areas.
Well, no, Jonathan, I think what you're saying is if you think about trimester, each 2 grade levels would get an additional art. The other 2 grade levels would get an additional library. The other 2 grade levels would get additional music, and that would rotate every trimester. So that equaled the 7.5 hours. What happens now is 3 grade levels get an additional library. 3 grade levels get an additional music. That's where those 7.5 hours went.
So it went to library and music.
Yeah.
Okay. Kathleen.
Again, I thank you, and it's a non-thankable job, but we've been looking for efficiencies all along. And, if you could see around the room I'm sitting in, this is the room where I paint every day and draw every day. So art is very important to me. And I really feel that 30 sessions of 40 minutes of art is not enough for our children. But at this point, when we have not analyzed and looked at the curriculum from top to bottom and understanding how much art you want for every children, I think for next year, this does the best. Teachers will have 5 sessions a day. Children will have all of that. And then during next year, I would want you to really look at it and hopefully find that it works, that children get more art. But it needs to be done in a systematic, curricular manner that is equal across all schools. So I think rather than hiring 6 teachers and then deciding that's not how it's going to happen and have to pull back on that, let's do it incrementally and do it smart and with thought. And I think, it's a tough decision, but we're looking for efficiencies. We need to analyze it. And I'm going to say, I'll keep saying we need more art, but it needs to be done smartly. And I'll just leave it at that. So I agree with the proposal for teachers at this point.
Sean.
First off, thanks for doing this heavy lifting during a budget season. It looks like a lot went into this. I'm confident it did. An observation, I want everybody to remember that, we're asking for a 3.45% uplift this year, but that doesn't include last year's uplift that got paid for by the town. So this is a double whammy this year, and I don't think everybody remembers that, and I don't think everybody's prepared for that. That being said, we've got a lot of damaged kids in this district. I hear it on the police radio every day. It's ugly out there, and these kids are going to need support when they come back in. Art is one outlet for that support, but $230,000 is a lot of money. And is that money better spent on psychologists or art or on, the other 3 math coaches that we deprecated last year when we put the 3 in, or art? There's an opportunity cost to everything we do. And I think that's what's at stake here. And just one last observation, I would love to have a cushy 0.8 job, which is what happens, it sounds like, if we go to 6 teachers versus 4. Unfortunately, that's not reality in my world, and I'm not sure that's the best approach. And it sounds like it's hard to attract the teachers if we were to go that route. Dr. De Silva, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, that's actually, what you heard, in fact, I think there's one school that it would be a 0.675 if we were to look at actual formulas in terms of teachers by school. But you're right about that, Sean, is that ideally, right, we would hire exactly what we needed for each school. But ultimately, we know that we don't attract teachers and it's hard to keep teachers. And quite frankly, it may not even be that variable. We have teachers that are full-time. So we may actually have to split a teacher from one school, 0.675, and then find that teacher's other 0.3, right, somewhere else before we could actually hire another. So the points and the way that they're broken up would lead us not to be in the best position from a scheduling perspective around staffing, but also obviously from a maintaining good people.
And when you have that, and I'm sorry, that was a really long transportation conversation, so I keep going back to deadhead, but when you have that, you don't get the full efficiency of a 4.5. It's like a 4.3 because they have to travel. And so in a 4.5, if you took those incrementals and you added them together and you said, okay, this teacher's going to be 0.8 at Branchville and 0.2 at Farmingville, well, you don't actually get that full efficiency of the 1.0 because they have to travel. And 4 of the 6 teachers would all be in multiple schools, which would layer on the inefficiency. So it sounds like more FTE leads to more contact time, but in some cases it's far more incremental than it feels when you jump from 3 to 4.5.
And then Rachel.
On 2 of those, 2 years ago we had 6 art teachers, so I don't know that it would be as difficult to find 3 more teachers as we're implying here, because 2 years ago we had them.
No, I'm sorry, Ken, please, no, let me we could find 3 art teachers. I think that's not the challenge. It's when you find points of people. Like
So
7.
Right. One of the points here was that it would be difficult to find teachers. So that was one of the points in the presentation.
It was difficult to be able
to maintain them, because once they find a full time, they're going with a full time.
Well, and so my other is we've managed to find, and again, I you want to apologize for this again, but we've managed to find a use for a full time for an FTE for a music teacher. We've been able to find, we've been able to utilize their full day. Is there, whether we do it with Rise or Elite or some other curriculum-based instruction, there should be a way. We found it with music. Why can't we find that with art?
See, the issue, this is getting back to my second recommendation. You're right, Ken, that is a great conversation, but it can't be had in isolation. Now, where are you taking that time from in the elementary child's day? And that's an entire audit of like much more things even than essentials. There is no doubt, as Corey, and I'm looking at you, Corey, on my Zoom to do this next year, and I'll pat you on the back and encourage you, that this will not be about essentials. This is going to talk about the elementary experience. It's going to start pushing into conversations about academics, like traditional academics, we'll say. So I think, Ken, that's the right question, but you start to pull that thread, it will unravel pretty quickly. And then the next thing we know, we're plugging holes instead of doing it in a thoughtful way. I mean, that's just maybe a little bit pessimistic of a way to see it, but it can happen easily.
Rachel.
I'm going to piggyback off of what you just said, Dr. Hanaway. And, listen, I want to encourage our board to keep this conversation on the burner. Welcoming our new assistant superintendent. I'm definitely looking forward to partnering with Ms. Gillette to ensure alignment and improvement to our art education program, as well as more academic support needed for our children, like math support. These are things that are not in our current proposed budget. And our community needs to know that they're not there, and we still need to talk about them. On a final note, I would like to see the 4 teacher schedules proposed by this recommendation. The purpose of seeing them would be to see the real time for prep being added, the needed time for travel if necessary and how often. And the recommendation does seem to provide an initial step towards improving art education in RPS, but there are also challenges listed here that are a concern to me. So if those schedules can be provided and we can include that discussion before the vote on 222. I think that would be important for transparency.
We have them.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this? I'm getting, feeling that we don't have complete alignment on the board here, whether we want to stick with the 3, to move to a 4, to move back to a 6. Looks like there's some room for consensus making still. Tina, you have your hand up?
I think I liked Rachel's idea, real time, how this looks, right? That's the only
Yep.
way for us to understand, because, I mean, we're not educators. I'm not. Rachel, you are. Sorry. I mean, I'm not speaking for you, but by and large, it'll help us to understand how this looks, and it'll help parents to understand, because in the end, it is the emails, it is the concerns we've heard from parents. So I'm trying to be a parent here, and I'm like, I'm a parent, I'm not an educator. I hear you. I trust our educators, our principals, our superintendent. And welcome, Corey. We'll look forward to you. So, I'm sorry, I should have said that before. But I think as a parent, I would like to understand how this looks in real time, so that if there are some concerns, there are opportunities for parents to address them, and you can help address them as far as possible. I'm sure it'll never be ideal. We will look for a whole, I agree with Liz when she says we have to look at this holistically. We do need to look at, K-12. I've said this and I'll say this. We've talked about mental health. There will be this huge piece to fill next year. We'll have a lot of gap in knowledge, another piece to fill. So we do need to look at this K-12, and I'm sure Corey will look forward to that partnership. But for now, as a parent and as a board member and talking to parents, I think it'll be great, to Rachel's point, to look how this looks. So with 4, and just, it might even address most of the concerns we're having, because, we're going back and forth and it is 10 o'clock. So that just might be an idea. So thank you, Rachel. I do agree with that.
And I'll just say, I'll forward those along to Susie, but I wouldn't have come with the 4 had we not mapped out what it literally would look like across the schedule. So the colored piece is just how people could be split, but we needed to see that it could actually work. So I'll pass those along to her.
Agree. Thank you.
Margaret.
Just thought I should weigh in. I know it's late, so I won't make my comments long. I'll just say that I pretty much agree with what Kathleen said. I think at this point, and I would like to see that data that we'll see, but I agree with the 4, what's been recommended here. And it's because I know that Corey is in place now, and that we're going to have that elementary director who are going to be in that spot to be able to look at everything at the elementary level, all in context. And we've heard for many, many years, even before when I was on the PTAs, about the equity of art, music, all of the essentials, and not having the curriculum behind that. That's been an ongoing issue for over a decade that I'm aware of. So I'm really encouraged that we've got the people in place to be looking at that. And perhaps next year, this step of 4 teachers is what we need to be able to then decide how we want to move forward with the right people.
That's it. Ken.
That was a good point that we raised. What impact does the 4 teachers, moving to 4 teachers, have on the budget? Is it going to be the same increase we've already been discussing?
It's about $77,000 of an increase, Ken, and I wouldn't at this point be prepared to go back into the budget to find that. So it would be an add to the budget, or I would ask this board to support an add to the budget.
Okay.
But it's about $77,000. That's the average teacher. Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, or Karen?
That's correct.
Okay. So on average.
Right, but that's without insurance. If they take insurance, you have to add another 25,000.
So it's $100,000.
Of that.
Yeah, just because I know we've spoken a lot about art, and I have no doubt that at least 3 art teachers are watching tonight, and I don't want to diminish the work that art teachers do, or any of our teachers do. And so whether they have a memorialized curriculum or they don't, these people are working hard. And actually that adds a layer, right? Is that they should be having somebody that's leading this work. We should be looking at 12th grade and then working all the way down to identify what our kids do need to experience in the elementary program to support them all the way up in art and in music and in PE and in every other curriculum area. And the reality is they've been neglected. And as much as we don't want to say that publicly because it doesn't feel good, it's true. All the curriculum areas, quite frankly, K-12 need a full review. We need to have conversations around that. As much as we're having conversations around buses and all this other stuff, it's as important, if not more important, that we really bring that to the stage in the coming year, in the coming years, so that this isn't happening again 3 years from now or 4 years from now. Whoever's sitting at this, at this Hollywood Squares can have an honest conversation of what the curriculum is and what the impact is when you do make a cut, whatever that cut is, to art, to music, to anything else. What is the implications of that?
Liz.
Thank you. Sorry, I know it's late, guys and gals, but so I just want to, I fully support the art recommendation. Thank you guys for putting that together. I know it was additional work, and I just want to echo, I applaud you for going back and trying to sharpen your pencils and do that. The challenge I have with it is, one of the things that we haven't really challenged very much is the amount of administrative overhead in this budget. It still maintains there. And to ask us for additional $77,000, I just want to reiterate Sean's point. The town budget covered financial gaps in the Board of Ed budget last year. We're already asking for an increase. And I've said it's a pretty reasonable increase. But looking at the economic situation that our townspeople are in, that our taxpayers are in, we have to be fiscally responsible. My first choice would be to cut areas that do not hit a classroom, always. Administrators, administration functions. When I see people getting 3%, 4% raises in those functions, I question that. When I see new hires, I question that. Only because those are things that we're now trading off classroom experiences. Whether you agree with them or not, whether they're 6 or 4 or whatever, we constantly talk about the first cuts coming in the classroom. Yet there's pushback when we ask about bus cuts. There's pushback when we ask about administrative cuts. Last year in the budget cycle, I went line by line through $1 million worth of potential opportunities. Not one of those things has even been discussed here. So they may be in there somewhere buried. I'm not going to go line by line again, because I think it was overall a responsible budget, but I can't support an incremental $77,000 when there's fat in there somewhere. And I just think looking at this town and looking at the situation Connecticut and the United States is in an increasing pandemic year, and asking for more and more and more and more to cover things we had 2 years ago without making some pretty dramatic reviews of every single role that doesn't hit a day-to-day classroom child experience. I have to put that on the table and say, if I was not on this board, my first question would be, well, wait a second, right? And so I would just challenge you guys to take a look at that, because we keep saying we're going to change the classroom teachers, but we're going to hire a new director. Well, that's 2 classroom teachers. So I think we just need to make sure, I need to represent the people that have reached out to me on that question, and certainly my own budget on that question, and say, as an executive myself, the first thing I do is say, do I need soldiers or generals? And I know we need both, but do we need all of both? So I'll leave it there.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for putting that together. We look forward to the detailed schedule as well. That'll help us determine next steps.
Okay.
Moving along to approval of RHS donations. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve a donation from the Ridgefield High School Student Activity Account in the amount of $140,000 for the creation of a mobile studio and video production activity area.
Do I have a second? Sean. Okay, if Dr. Greenwood is still awake?
Dr. Greenwood and Jane Street are here if they're still awake. I'm not sure, but you may remember the last time that we were here, we spoke about funding a couple of different spaces, one of which seemed to be a little bit cleaner when it came to future use, and one we felt that could have the potential, should we go down a road of clubs or something like that, where may want to give kids the opportunity to use that space in different ways, not only outside of the school day, but perhaps as part of a school function like a club. So therefore, we changed the model in which we were asking for, or informing and asking you now for approval of those funds as a donation to the high school. So Dr. Greenwood and Mr. Street are here for any questions.
Rachel.
I just have two. Just to further confirm from our budget committee meeting on 129, there would be no reoccurring fees or annual expenses that wouldn't be covered by a Perkins grant. Is that correct?
That's correct, from the Perkins grant.
Yeah, the only
And,
recurring fees would be normal fees, like turn the lights on.
okay. I'm sorry, Dr. Greenwood, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was saying the only fees would be a normal fee, for instance, turning the lights on in the in the space.
Oh, the lights, like electricity. Okay.
Yeah.
We also heard rationale on 129 during our budget committee meeting around learning connections, that these could be collaborative spaces for math, English, history, and world language. And the cost, I believe, was around 60,000, and also to be funded from that student activity fund. Will this project be coming back to the board, or is it being shelved for now?
We're planning on doing both projects if approved.
So Rachel, those funds were basically furniture, right? The rooms were cleared out, they were prepared. So now those are additional spaces for kids to utilize throughout their day, right? They can go there when they just want to work collaboratively and or work independently, or work on a project with another peer. So that was a little bit more straightforward in terms of the supplanting or the supplementing later in the future, where this other piece wasn't. So we distinguished them by having this piece come back to you as a donation. So in the event that Dr. Greenwood and the high school want to further use this space, these areas, in ways that foster work from a particular club, that they can do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? There being a motion on the table, all in favor, raise your hands. Unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very exciting. Okay, moving on. Superintendent's proposed budget.
Okay, I don't know that there's much more that I can share tonight, but really it's so that the board can provide any additional feedback or have any discussion that they might want to have around the budget before the 22nd. I know what our charge is with respect to art and bringing back a schedule. Obviously, the transportation work will happen likely not before the 22nd. Not sure that there would be a budget impact there, at least for the coming year anyway, but anything that you'd like me to think about or questions for our team?
Were there still open questions regarding what's under the Teachers College funding?
Tell me specifically what, okay.
Of the TC Readers and Writers Workshop, what portions, what amount is in this year's budget?
Yeah, I was just
Specifically
about,
what pieces?
yeah, let me just pull up that Google Doc because that's not outlined in my. While I look that up, I don't know if you want to ask another question just so I can have that handy for you, Ken.
No, I'm good. That was the question I was going to ask about related to that. From the art perspective, would it be possible to we know that to see the impact of adding the fourth art teacher, of adding 3 more art teachers? I mean, we've discussed that number holistically as adds to the budget. But could we go through the exercise of keeping them, of not having them be adds to the budget?
They would have to be adds.
In other words, finding the funding.
So you're asking for a cut of $230,000 in the budget.
Yes. Well, with the and the set and the 100,000 for the one FTE that's being proposed by the administration.
Up, you made her leave.
I'm sorry. Can
I
you,
know. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't make
I
me.
didn't mean to make you leave.
Just clarify for me what you're asking. Ken, one more time. Maybe it's the 1019.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. Because so it's going to be roughly 100,000 with salary and benefits to add the one FTE as proposed by administration. So you're currently proposing that as an add to the budget. Can we see that as a flat? Can we find those savings somewhere?
So you're asking what Ms. Vogel asked before, correct? To come back
Exactly. Yep.
Just show.
Yep.
where that impact would be. Okay.
Right. What the impact would be, and because it's been voiced definitely by the community and by several other board members, what would it look like at 6 FTE for art? So we said it's about 233,000, which is probably closer to 3.
Yep.
And so what would that look like? Is that even possible to do as a keeping your increase as already requested?
You asking me for that answer?
Yes.
You're asking me to cut 30,000 without benefits. So perhaps 330,000. I mean, we brought a budget that we felt was as strong as it could be without impacting programs. Yes, there's another curriculum position in there, but I think if we've learned anything throughout this process, that we need it. So we can look at what the impact would be, but we've gone through line by line. I think our administrative teams did a really good job of presenting how they came up with their number. So, I mean, we can certainly show what the impact would be, but there would be an impact for sure.
I mean, maybe there's opportunities to look at raises or some other structure. I know some of that's contracted, some of it's not, or non-certified. You know, maybe there's some opportunities there to get creative given the impact the last year has had. I mean, lots and lots of people are giving up jobs and all kinds of benefits and things in the general community as well. So this may be a year where, because of the unprecedented times, we start to think about some maybe more creative options as well. If you really feel like you need a new role, maybe there's a way to balance out some of the existing. I don't know. Just an idea.
Most of our raises are contractual. I mean, there's a few that are not, but by and large, they are.
Any other budget related questions?
Ken, I just wanted to come back to that TC question. Across the 5 schools, 5 days, $69,000. That's 5 days per elementary school. And we also have, you might remember, we also have days at the middle school. And I pulled that up. It'll just take me another minute.
And that's strictly the professional development?
That's the elementary, right? That's the elementary professional development. That's not our phonics professional development. That's just small groups, guided reading, read alouds, all the staff development. So each elementary school is 5 days. So just think about 6th grade levels across 5 days of PD. It's not a significant amount. Our middle school, Ken, is 26,000.
And then what about, aren't there also purchases for supplies and materials, that type of thing?
For next year, we're not buying any new units of study. And most of the time, you know what, I'm about to put Corey on the spot right now because she could probably speak to that. We do have, though, in our budget, we have both staff development related to systematic phonics and the purchasing of a phonics program. So that we have both pieces. Corey, do you want to talk about the units of study and when you actually purchase new units, and if you do?
Well, I can't, being my first day.
Be that as it may, Corey.
I cannot speak to how many units of study are needed, but in general, they're purchased and used for many years in a row. So I didn't see that as a line besides a little bit of replacements. Foundations or whatever the phonics program that is selected is earmarked. And that is whatever is selected, that's a typical amount. We haven't been through that process. Again, it's my first day. But you'll also notice that that is in there, as well as professional development to support that.
So in summary, we can say that we plan on spending, what is that? Oh God, I can't even say $95,000 with Teachers College in this current budget.
If you were taking the middle school and the right, but let's just say that we weren't. Let's say, take the entity of Teachers College out.
Sure.
And if I was looking at an elementary literacy program, I would be saying, okay, what are the needs of our school? Now, Teachers College, the staff developers identify with the elementary principal what the needs are. So for example, Branchville may say, this year, my intermediate grades 3 through 5, we're working on differentiation. So we'd like the staff developer to come in and work on differentiation within our units of study. Whereas perhaps in their K2, they want to work on read alouds. Perhaps that's completely different at Veterans Park. So if we were not using Teachers College, the entity, we would be asking those same questions around literacy, because those are best practices in literacy. It doesn't matter the entity. The problem I think that we have is that we're associating the teaching of reading in our elementary school with Teachers College. And that's an unfortunate characterization, because the teaching of reading is so much more, right? It's phonological awareness, it's phonemic awareness, it's the teaching of phonics. That's, you can't have a kid, comprehension. You can only understand what you're reading once you've learned to read. And you need to be able to teach that in a systematic way. So again, these happen to be coupled together. And I think it comes back to a lot of conversations that we should be having at the full board level or at committee level, however way we want to do it, around this topic. Because if we weren't having TC, I would be saying to my principals, what are your needs for next year around that piece outside of phonics? What do you need for teaching kids meaning, right? Comprehension. And they would probably be identifying some of the same things. Our teachers are struggling with bringing kids together with this particular need or that particular need, or differentiation or guided reading. And we'd be saying, okay, let's go find some good staff developers to do this work, right? It just so happens that we use this entity because we do use the units of study. But unfortunately, there's this other layer that is historically here that I think we just haven't had real honest conversations about, or transparent conversations about.
Right. So in other words, you would be spending the $95,000, but perhaps you'd be spending it on evidence-based instruction rather than Teachers College.
Well, so let me come back to the teachers. So the staff developers, let's just say that staff developers out of Teachers College, sometimes they leave Teachers College and they go work as a consultant, right? Or work for another organization, or, just a group that works on differentiation, right? You're still hiring that consultant to do some of the work. The research-based instruction, in the confusion I think that has come about, is that we haven't been talking about systematic phonics and phonological awareness and phonemic awareness in our early years. We haven't been talking about that. And so unfortunately, we're talking about this other piece that's important work happens there, but we haven't been talking about this other piece. So Corey, it's all yours now. You get to go day one.
I am so happy to be here and to really help the community understand how the units are just one piece of a comprehensive literacy program. And I will do anything that I can do to help you understand that. And I think that the consistency around a systematic approach to phonics, and also what is even more important in the early grades, is phonological awareness. And that is something that we're not talking about. So there's a lot of words that have been out, and I've read all the research that I know you're referring to. And it is a little bit more complicated. And I hope that I can do a good job in helping everyone feel more comfortable with that approach, and that we can do some really good staff development and really come together and figure out what's the best approach for all the elementary schools together. So that's the work to come on my first day.
Faster, Corey. We have a budget to
Sorry,
pass.
sorry.
2 weeks.
Any more on that subject or any other questions regarding the budget? There being none, do I have a, oh wait, correspondence to the board. Almost forgot the best part.
Okay, correspondence report. We have received 24 emails since our last regular Board of Education meeting. 4 emails advocated for the RPS learning model to return full in person for the week of 2/1. 11 emails advocated for enhancing the art program in RPS, including having one art teacher for each elementary school and increasing opportunities for art in the district. 1 email advocated for the art program in RPS and included a link to a petition titled Quality Arts Education for RPS, which included 274 signatures at the time of receipt. 1 email was to share budget concerns. 2 emails were in regard to Board of Ed public hearings. 1 email advocated for STEM K2. 1 email advocated for remote learning days during a snow day. 1 email was in regard to the open choice program. And 1 email regarded face shields and the communication sent to families. And 1 email shared concerns on teachers' college programming and professional development.
Thank you. At this point, do I see a motion to adjourn? Rachel, second, Liz? All in favor? It's unanimous. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for a long night.